beneath the merciless Iraqi sun, the ancient ruins of Tel Urimia guard secrets darker than their buried tombs. Nurse Amy Letheran steps into a desert dig where fear festers and shadows stalk. Louise Leidner, tormented by ghostly visions and chilling threats, hides a past that someone refuses to let die. When a locked room murder shocks the camp, Hercule Poirot arrives to unearth the truth. Is the killer one of the eclectic archaeologists? What ancient cursor human vendetta lurks in the sands? And will Poirot solve the riddle before death strikes again? Welcome to Murder in Mesopotamia, where every dune hides a deadly lie. Chapter 1. Arrival at Hassanith. Train's whistle sliced through the stifling air. A shrill cry that seemed to quiver in the heat haze rippling over the Iraqi desert. Nurse Amy Letheran clutched her worn leather satchel, its straps slick, bive with sweat, as the locomotive shuddered to a halt at Hassani's ramshackle station. The platform, if one could call it that, was little more than a stretch of cracked earth bordered by a sagging wooden awning. Dust swirled around her sturdy boots, coating the hem of her practical navy skirt. She squinted against the relentless, bare sun, its glare bouncing off the endless dunes that stretched toward the horizon like the waves of a petrified sea. Amy, at 32, was no stranger to discomfort. Her years nursing in London's overcrowded hospitals and remote colonial outposts had hardened her to heat, fatigue, and the occasional bout of homesickness. Yet something about this place, its vast, unyielding emptiness, stirred a flicker of unease in her chest. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, shielding her freckled face, and scanned the station for her contact. Dr. Giles Riley, a friend from her Cairo days, had arranged this peculiar assignment to care for Louise Leidner, the wife of an archaeologist, leading a dig near the ancient ruins of Tel Urimia. The details were vague. Louise was nervous, prone to fancies, and needed a steady hand. Amy, ever pragmatic, had accepted the job for the pay and the chance to see a corner of the world few nurses ever would. A wiry man in a faded khaki suit emerged from the shadow of the awning, his face half hidden by a battered fedora. "Miss Letheran." His voice was clipped with a faint American drawl. "I'm Bill Coleman, Dr. Leidner's assistant, sent to fetch you." Amy nodded, sizing him up. Coleman was young, perhaps mid-20s, with a boyish grin that didn't quite reach his sharp blue eyes. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Coleman. Long way out here, isn't it? You ain't kiddin'." He hoisted her suitcase with a grunt, leading her toward a dust-caked Ford parked crookedly beside a cluster of date palms. "Hop in. The dig's about an hour's drive, and the road's more suggestion than fact." The car rattled to life, coughing black smoke as it lurched onto a track that barely qualified as a road. Amy gripped the door handle, her gaze drifting to the desert. The dunes rolled endlessly, broken only by the occasional jagged outcrop or the skeletal remains of a long-dead acacia. Coleman kept up a stream of chatter, pointing out landmarks, a crumbling Ottoman watchtower, a Bedouin encampment shimmering in the distance. But Amy's thoughts wandered to Louise Leidner. What kind of woman, she wondered, needed a nurse. In the middle of nowhere, was it illness or something less tangible? Ever been to a dig before? Coleman asked, swerving to avoid a pothole. First time, Amy admitted. I've patched up soldiers and sailors, but archaeologists are a new breed. What's the team like? Coleman's grin faltered, just for a moment. Oh, they're a mixed bag. Dr. Leidner's the boss, brilliant man, bit intense. His wife, Mrs. Leidner, well, you'll see. Then there's Richard Carey, architect, an old friend of the Leidner. Joseph Mercado, our inscriptions guy, bit of a nervous sort. Marie, his wife, keeps the camp running. And Father Livigny, our epigraphist, knows more about ancient scribbles than anyone alive. Odd bunch, but they get the job done. Amy noted the hesitation in his tone. Sounds like quite the crew. Any trouble I should know about? Coleman's hands tightened on the wheel. Trouble? Nah. Just the usual long hours, short tempers. Desert does that to folks. He laughed too brightly and changed the subject. To the dig's latest find, a clay tablet etched with cuneiform, unearthed just days ago. The car crested a low ridge, and the dig site came into view, a sprawl of mud-brick buildings huddled against a vast mound. The tell itself, its slopes, discarded by trenches and scaffolding. Tents dotted the perimeter, their canvas flapping in the hot wind. Workers in Kafirs moved like ants, hauling baskets of earth under the watchful eyes of European supervisors. The air carried the faint tang of dust and something sharper, like burnt incense. Coleman parked near a low wall, and Amy stepped out, her boots sinking into the powdery soil. The compound was a maze of narrow paths, with buildings that looked as ancient as the ruins they were excavating. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses approached, his linen suit pristine despite the dust. Miss Leather, I'm Eric Leidner. Welcome to Tel Yerimja. His handshake was firm, his smile warm but strained. Up close, Amy saw the lines etched around his eyes, the kind that spoke of sleepless nights. Thank you, Dr. Leidner. I'm here for your wife, I understand. Yes, Louise. His voice softened, but a shadow crossed his face. She's delicate. The isolation here, the heat, it's been hard on her. I trust, Dr. Riley told. You, some, Amy said cautiously. Nervousness, he mentioned. Anything specific I should know? Leidner hesitated, glancing toward the largest building, its windows shuttered against the sun. She's had episodes, visions, she calls them. I'd rather you see for yourself. She's expecting you. Amy followed him through the compound, noting the curious glances from workers and the low murmur of voices from a nearby tent. The air inside the main building was cooler, heavy with the scent of old books and linseed oil. A woman stood by a table covered in pottery shards, her blonde hair pinned loosely, her silk dress an impractical splash of color in the drab surroundings. Louise Leidner was beautiful, strikingly so, with wide blue eyes and a fragile, almost ethereal quality. But her hands trembled as she turned to greet Amy. You must be Nurse Letherin, she said, her voice soft but with an edge, like a violin string stretched too tight. Giles spoke highly of you, Mrs. Leidner. Amy offered a reassuring smile. I'm here to help. Dr. Riley said you've been under some strain. Louise's laugh was brittle. Strain. That's one way to put it. This place. She gestured vaguely at the walls, as if they might close in. It's alive, in a way. The desert, the ruins. Sometimes I feel it watching me. Amy raised an eyebrow, but kept her tone neutral. The heat can play tricks. Why don't you tell me more? Any symptoms, headaches, sleeplessness? Louise sank into a chair, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief. It's not just the heat. I see things, faces in the shadows. At night, there's a sound like whispering, but not words I can understand. Eric thinks I'm imagining it, but I know what I feel. Amy nodded, her nurse's instinct kicking in. Delusions, perhaps, or exhaustion. But something in Louise's eyes' fear, raw and real, made her pause. Have you always felt this way? Or is it since you came here? Since we arrived, Louise said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The letters started then. 2 letters. Amy leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Louise hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. Threatening. One's anonymous, they mention. My past. Things no one here should know. Before Amy could press further, the door swung open, and a man strode in tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the tension in his jaw. Louise, you're supposed to be resting. His tone was gentle but firm, and Amy guessed this was Richard Carey, the architect Coleman had mentioned. I'm fine, Richard, Louise said, a touch of defiance in her voice. This is Nurse Letherin. She's here too. Keep me sane, apparently. Kara's eyes flicked to Amy, appraising. Good to meet you, Nurse. We could use a steady head around here. His smile was brief, almost forced, and Amy caught a flicker of something guilt, worry, in his expression. Dinner's in an hour, Leidner said, reappearing in the doorway. Miss Letherin, I'll show you to your room. You'll meet the rest of the team then. Amy's room was small but tidy, with a narrow cot, a wooden chair, and a single window overlooking the Tell. She unpacked her satchel, laying out her nursing kit and a worn copy of Jane Eyre for the long desert nights. As she changed into a fresh blouse, she replayed Louise's words, visions, whispering, threatening letters, hysteria, perhaps. But the fear in her eyes was real, and Kara's tension, Leidner's strained smile, Coleman's evasive chatter, something was off. Like a melody played in the wrong key. Dinner was served in a low-ceilinged room lit by oil lamps, their flickering light casting shadows on the whitewashed walls. The team gathered around a long table, the air thick with the aroma of spiced lamb and flatbread. Amy took her seat, studying her companions. Joseph Mercado, a wiry man with nervous hands, fidgeted with his fork. His wife, Marie, woman with a tight bun, served the food with brisk efficiency. Father Levigny, a French monk in a black cassock, spoke little, his dark eyes scanning the room as if reading an invisible script. Coleman, now in a clean shirt, kept the conversation light, joking about scorpions and sandstorms. Leidner raised a glass of watered wine to our new arrival, Miss Letheran, and to the treasures of Tel Urimja. The others echoed the toast. But Amy noticed Louise's glass remained untouched. She sat beside her husband, her face pale, her eyes darting to the windows. "Do you hear it?" she whispered to Amy, so softly no one else noticed. "The whispering, it's louder tonight." Amy strained her ears, but all she heard was the wind rattling the shutters and the distant bark of a jackal. "Try to eat something," she murmured, patting Louise's hand. "It'll help." After dinner, Amy walked Louise back to her room, noting the heavy lock on the door and the barred window. "You're safe here," she said, more to reassure herself than Louise. "I'm just down the hall if you need me." Louise's smile was thin. "Safe. I wish I believed that. Good night, nurse." Amy returned to her room, her mind buzzing. She lit a candle and opened her journal, a habit from her nursing days, and began to write. "Arrived at Telluremia today. Strange place, strange people. Mrs. Leidner is beautiful but fragile, like a glass vase ready to shatter. Something's not right here, too many secrets, too many glances. I'll keep my eyes open." As she wrote, a shadow moved outside her window, swift and silent, gone before she could be sure it was real. Her pulse quickened, and she set down her pen, staring into the darkness. The desert stretched beyond, vast and unyielding, its secrets buried beneath centuries of sand. Whatever was happening at Telluremia, Amy Letheran was determined to uncover it. Chapter 2. Whispers of the past. The Iraqi sun blazed mercilessly over the dig site near Hassoni, its heat a tangible weight pressing down on Nurse Amy Letheran's shoulders. Her boots crunched against the parched earth as she followed the narrow path from her room in the mud-brick compound to the central courtyard. The air shimmered, distorting the distant ziggurat ruins into a mirage of ancient ghosts. Last night's fleeting shadow outside her window lingered in her mind, a puzzle piece that didn't yet fit. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, squinting by against the glare, and resolved to focus on her patient, Louise Leidner, whose nervous disposition had already begun to unsettle her. Amy's first full day at the dig had barely begun, but the compound buzzed with activity. Workers hauled baskets of dirt from the excavation trenches, their voices a low hum of Arabic laced with urgency. The archaeological team, a motley crew of scholars and eccentrics, moved with purpose, their tools clinking against stone. Amy's nurse's instincts told her this place was more than a dig. Sight it was a crucible of secrets, each person carrying their own unspoken burdens. She found Louise in the shaded veranda, a fragile figure in a cream linen dress, her blonde hair pinned loosely under a scarf. Louise's eyes, a startling blue against her pale skin, darted toward the horizon as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the dunes. Amy approached, her professional smile in place, but her curiosity sharpened by Louise's evident unease. "Good morning, Mrs. Leidner," Amy said, setting down her medical bag. "How did you sleep?" Louise's fingers twisted a handkerchief into knots. Fitfully, nurse. "The desert, ... It speaks at night. Whispers, you know. I thought I heard footsteps outside my room, but when I looked, there was nothing." Her voice was soft, almost musical, but threaded with a tremor that made Amy's skin prickle. "Footsteps." Amy kept her tone neutral, though her mind flashed to the shadow she'd seen. "It's an old place. The wind plays tricks. Or perhaps it was one of the workers." Louise shook her head, her gaze distant. "No, it wasn't the wind. It's put him, I'm sure of it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been getting letters, nurse. Threatening ones. They started months ago, before we came here. I thought they'd stopped, but yesterday, another arrived." Amy's pulse quickened. "Letters? From whom?" Louise hesitated, her eyes searching Amy's face, as if gauging her trustworthiness. "My first husband, Frederick Bosner, or so they claim. But he's he's supposed to be. I saw him die years ago in a train wreck. Yet the letters, there in his hand, his phrases, things only he would know." Amy frowned, her practical nature warring with the chill creeping up her spine. "Have you shown these to Dr. Leidner?" Louise's lips tightened. "Eric thinks I'm imagining things. He says it's the strain of the dig, or my nerves. But I know what I've seen, nurse. Someone wants me to suffer." Before Amy could press further, a shadow fell across the veranda. Richard Carey, the expedition's architect, approached with a disarming smile. His tanned face and tousled dark hair gave him a rugged charm, but his green eyes held a guarded intensity. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice smooth as the desert wind. "Louise, you're looking pale. Not letting the heat get to you, I hope." Louise's smile was brittle, just the usual Richard. "The desert's charms are ... overwhelming." Kara's gaze lingered on her, a flicker of something concerned, or perhaps something deeper crossing his face before he turned to Amy. "Nurse Letheran, settling in. This place takes some getting used to. Half the crew thinks the ruins are cursed." Amy raised an eyebrow, sensing an opportunity to probe. "Cursed? That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" Carey shrugged, his smile teasing. "You've not been here long enough to hear the stories. Locals say the ziggurat spirits don't take kindly to us digging up their graves. And then there's that clay tablet we found last week, etched with symbols no one can translate. Gives even the scholars the creeps." Louise's hand tightened on her handkerchief. "That tablet ... I found it in my room last night, on my bedside table." Carey's smile faded. "In your room? That's impossible. It's locked in the artifact shed." Amy's mind raced. Could someone have taken it? One of the workers, perhaps. Carey shook his head. Not likely. The shed's guarded, and Dr. Leidner keeps the only key. Sounds like someone's playing a cruel joke. Louise stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "It's no joke, Richard. You know it isn't." She turned to Amy, her eyes pleading. Nurse, please, keep this between us for now. I don't want Eric worrying. Amy nodded, though her instincts screamed to investigate. Of course, Mrs. Light. Bye. If these letters are real, we should tell someone, Captain Maitland. Perhaps. Louise's face paled further. No police. Not yet. I just need ... time. As Louise retreated to her room, Carey watched her go, his expression unreadable. She's been like this for weeks, he murmured. Ever since the first letter arrived. I'd hoped the desert would calm her, but it's only made things worse. Amy studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders. You seem close to her. Has she told you anything else about these letters? Kara's eyes flicked to hers, sharp and assessing. Close, I suppose. We've worked together for years. But she's Eric's wife. Nurse, don't read too much into it. He turned toward the dig site, his voice casual but strained. Come meet the rest of the crew. They're an odd bunch, but they'll keep you entertained. Amy followed, her mind buzzing with questions. The courtyard opened into the main excavation area, where trenches crisscrossed the earth like scars. The team was scattered across the site, their voices mingling with the clatter of picks and shovels. Carey led her to a shaded tent where Joseph Mercado, the expedition's epigrapher, hunched over a table strewn with pottery shards. His thin frame and jittery movements suggested a man perpetually on edge, his dark eyes darting as if expecting an ambush. Joseph, this is Nurse Letheran, Carey said. She's here to keep Louise from fainting in this heat. Mercado barely looked up, his fingers trembling as he brushed dirt from a shard. Welcome to hell, nurse, he muttered. Mind the scorpions and the ghosts. Amy forced a laugh, though his tone unnerved her. Ghosts. Mr. Carey mentioned something about a cursed tablet. Mercado's hand froze, and he glanced at Carey, a silent question passing between them. Cursed. Superstition, mostly. But that tablet... It's old. Sumerian, maybe older. The symbols don't match anything in our records. Makes you wonder what we're digging up. Before Amy could respond, a deep voice interrupted. Wondering is the scholar's curse. Mr. Mercado, Father Lavigny, the team's linguist and supposed monk, emerged from the tent's shadows. His tall, gaunt frame and black robes gave him an almost spectral presence, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. Nurse Letheran, a pleasure. I trust you're finding our little outpost... enlightening. Amy nodded, though his piercing gaze made her skin crawl. It's certainly different from London. What do you make of this tablet everyone's talking about? Lavigna's lips curved into a faint smile. A relic of a lost world. Its symbols may be a warning or a prayer. We've yet to decide. But the past has a way of speaking to those who listen. His tone was cryptic, almost theatrical, and Amy couldn't shake the feeling he was performing for her benefit. The conversation was cut short by a shout from the trenches. Carey, we've got something. Bill Coleman, a young assistant with a boyish grin, waved frantically from a nearby pit. Amy and Carey hurried over, followed by Mercado and Lavigny. The workers had uncovered a small clay figurine, its features worn but unmistakably human, with eyes that seemed to stare through the century. "Remarkable," Carey breathed, kneeling to examine it. "Early Bronze Age, maybe. Look at the craftsmanship." Mechthos' hands shook as he sketched the find, his pencil scratching furiously. "Another one for the catalogue. But why does it feel like it's watching us?" Lavigna's smile didn't waver. The ancients believed their idols held power. Perhaps this one still does. Amy suppressed a shiver, her nurse's pragmatism clashing with the eerie atmosphere. She glanced at the workers, their faces a mix of awe and unease. One of them, a wiry man named Hassan, muttered something in Arabic, his eyes fixed on the figurine. Amy caught the word jinn, and though she didn't speak the language, the fear in his tone was universal. As the team dispersed to catalogue the find, Amy lingered, her thoughts returning to Louise's letters. The clay tablet, the threatening notes, the shadow outside her window, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. She resolved to keep a closer eye on the team, starting with Carey's guarded glances and MacArthur's nervous ticks. Lavigna's cryptic remarks didn't sit right either. Was he a monk or something else entirely? Dinner that evening was a tense affair held in the compound's dining hall, a cavernous room with mud-brick walls and a single flickering lamp. Dr. Eric Leidner presided at the head of the table, his scholarly demeanor a stark contrast to the crew's unease. His graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority, but his frequent glances at Louise betrayed his worry. She sat beside him, her face pale, picking at her food. Amy sat opposite Richard Carey, who seemed determined to keep the mood light. "Piss so, nurse," he said, spearing a piece of flatbread. "What's the strangest case you've nursed? Surely nothing as bizarre as this lot." Amy smiled, sensing his attempt to deflect. "Oh, I've seen my share of oddities. But this place, it's got a pulse of its own. Mrs. Leidner mentioned those letters. Have you seen them?" The table fell silent, forks pausing mid-air. Louise's eyes widened, and Dr. Leidner's jaw tightened. "Amy," Louise said sharply, "I asked you to keep that private." "I'm sorry," Amy said quickly, though she wasn't. "I just thought since Mr. Carey mentioned the tablet." "What tablet?" Dr. Leidner's voice was calm but edged with steel. "Louise, what's this about?" Louise's hands trembled as she set down her glass. "It was in my room last night, Eric. The clay tablet from the shed. I don't know how it got there." Double quotes. Dr. Leidner's face darkened. "That's impossible. The shed's locked, and I have the key." He patted his pocket, then froze, his hand diving inside. "It's gone." A collective gasp rippled through the room. MacArthur's fork clattered to his plate, and Lavigna's eyes gleamed with something Amy couldn't place: amusement, perhaps, or calculation. Carey leaned back, his expression unreadable, while Bill Coleman and Anne Johnson, Dr. Leidner's assistant, exchanged nervous glances. "Someone must have taken it," Amy said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Mrs. Leidner, did you see anyone near your room?" Louise shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, but I felt ... watched all night. Father Livigny leaned forward, his voice smooth as silk. The desert plays tricks. Mrs. Leidner, shadows become spectres, and silence becomes voices. Perhaps you dreamed it. Louise's eyes flashed. I didn't dream the tablet, Father, or the letters. Dr. Leidner stood, his chair scraping back. Enough. I'll check the shed. Richard, Joseph, come with me. The rest of you, stay here. As the men left, Amy watched the remaining team members. Anne Johnson, a quiet woman with sharp features, stared at her plate, her fingers drumming nervously. Bill Coleman tried to lighten the mood with a joke about desert mirages, but it fell flat. Livigny sipped his tea, his eyes never leaving Louise, who seemed on the verge of tears. Amy leaned toward her. Mrs. Leidner, can you show me one of those letters? It might help us figure out who's behind this. Louise hesitated, then nodded. In my room, but please, nurse, don't tell Eric. He'll think I'm losing my mind. They excused themselves, and Amy followed Louise to her small, sparsely furnished room. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine from a vase on the window-sill. Louise knelt by her bedside table, pulling out a locked box. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a stack of letters tied with twine. She handed one to Amy. Its paper yellowed and creased. Amy unfolded it, her eyes scanning the jagged handwriting. You thought you could escape me, Louise, but I'm closer than you know. The desert hides no secrets from me. The signature was a scrawl, F. Bosner. Amy's heart thudded. The words were intimate, venomous, as if written by someone who knew Louise's deepest fears. This is his handwriting, she asked. Louise nodded, tears brimming. Exactly as I remember it. But it can't be him. He's dead, isn't he? Amy didn't answer, her mind racing. The letter felt too personal, too precise. If Frederick Bosner was dead, someone else knew enough to mimic him perfectly. But who? Carey, with his lingering glances. Mercado, with his shaking hands. Or Livigny, whose calm demeanor hid something Amy couldn't yet name. Before she could speak, a distant howl echoed across the desert, sharp and mournful. Louise gasped, clutching Amy's arm. That's not a dog, she whispered. It's him. I know it. Amy's pulse raced, but she kept her voice calm. It's probably just the wind. Mrs. Leidner, let's get you settled. I'll stay nearby tonight. As she helped Louise into bed, Amy's thoughts churned. The howl, the tablet, the letters, they were threads in a tapestry she couldn't yet see. But one thing was clear. The danger wasn't just in Louise's mind. Something or someone was stalking the dig. And Amy was determined to uncover the truth before it struck again. She returned to her room, her journal open on the desk. Under the flickering light of her lamp, she wrote, "The desert is alive tonight, whispering secrets I can't yet decipher. Louise's fear is real, but is it a ghost from her past or a threat among us? The tablet, the letters, the shadow, they're connected. I'm sure of it. Tomorrow I'll watch closer. Someone here knows more than they're saying." As she closed the journal, the howl sounded again, closer this time, and Amy's hand froze on the pen. The desert was speaking, and its voice was anything but kind. Chapter 3. Shadows on the Sand. The Iraqi sun blazed mercilessly over the Hassani dig site, its heat a tangible weight on Amy Leatherin's shoulders as she stepped out of the mud-brick compound. The air shimmered, distorting the distant ziggurat. Ruins sin to a mirage of jagged teeth against the horizon. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, her nurse's practicality warring with the surreal beauty of the desert. Her role here was to care for Louise Leidner, the expedition leader's wife, but the undercurrents of tension among the team felt like a fever she couldn't diagnose. Today, the camp buzzed with a new Energia golden amulet, unearthed just hours ago, promised to rewrite the history of the 4th millennium BC. Yet, as Amy crossed the dusty path toward the dig site, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. Something was wrong. The excavation pit swarmed with activity. Local workers, their robes streaked with sand, hauled baskets of earth under the watchful eye of Richard Carey, the expedition's deputy. His easy charm was strained today, his jaw tight as he barked orders. Nearby, Joseph Mercado, the team's epigrapher, scribbled furiously in a notebook, his hands trembling as he studied a clay fragment. Father Lavigny, the monkish scholar, stood apart, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon as if communing with the ancient gods. Amy's gaze lingered on him. His stillness was unnerving, like a statue carved from the desert itself. Miss Leatherin, Dr. Eric Leidner's voice cut through the din. He strode toward her, his lean frame dusted with sand, his blue eyes alight with excitement. Have you seen it? The amulet, it's extraordinary. Gold, inlaid with lapis, untouched for millennia. His enthusiasm was infectious, but Amy caught a flicker of strain in his smile, a shadow that didn't match the triumph of the find. I heard, Amy replied, her voice steady despite the heat. Mrs. Leidner mentioned it this morning. She's thrilled, but she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Louise had been restless at dawn, pacing her room, muttering about eyes in the dark watching her from the ruins. Amy had dismissed it as nerves, but the memory gnawed at her. Eric's smile faltered. She's been delicate lately. The desert can unsettle anyone. Keep an eye on her, please. She trusts you. Amy nodded, her gaze drifting to the pit where the amulet had been found. A cluster of workers knelt around a cleared patch of earth, their tools glinting in the sun. One of them, a wiry man named Hassan, was gesturing animatedly, his voice rising in rapid Arabic. Richard Carey stepped in, his tone sharp as he waved the man back to work. Amy frowned. Hassan's agitation wasn't the usual chatter of the crew. It felt urgent, almost fearful, before she could approach. A piercing scream shattered the air. The workers froze, tools clattering to the ground. Amy's heart lurched as she spun toward the sound, her nurse's instincts kicking in. Book. It came from the edge of the pit, where a group of locals had gathered, their faces ashen. Richard was already sprinting toward them, Eric close behind. Amy followed, her boots sinking into the sand. At the pit's edge, A body lay. Local worker, his robe twisted round him, his eyes wide and unseeing. Blood seeped from a gash on his temple, staining the sand crimson. Hassan knelt beside him, muttering prayers, his hands shaking as he pressed a cloth to the wound. The other workers backed away, their whispers a low hum of fear. "What happened?" Eric demanded, kneeling beside the body. His face was pale, but his voice held the calm of a man used to crises. Hassan looked up, his eyes wild. He fell, sired, from the scaffold, hit the stones. His voice cracked, and he gestured to a wooden platform above, its ropes frayed and swaying in the breeze. Amy crouched beside the man, her fingers searching for a pulse. His skin was clammy, his breath gone. She shook her head, meeting Eric's gaze. "He's dead." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard swore under his breath, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. An accident," he said, almost to himself. "These scaffolds are old. We should have checked them." Amy's eyes narrowed. The scaffold's ropes looked worn, but not snapped. Something about the scene felt staged, like a tableau in one Bruce's beloved mystery novels. She glanced at the dead man's hand, curled tightly around a small, smooth stone. It wasn't a tool or a shard from the dig. It looked deliberate. Placed. Captain Maitland, the local policeman, arrived within the hour, his khaki uniform crisp despite the dust. A stocky man with a nonsense air, he surveyed the scene with practiced eye. "Tragic," he said, scribbling in a notebook. "Accident, most likely. These scaffolds aren't built for heavy work. I'll need statements, but it seems straightforward." Amy bit her lip, her unease growing. Maitland's dismissal felt too quick, too tidy. She caught Eric and Richard exchanging a glance, their voices low as they stepped away from the body. "Sabotage," Richard murmured, his tone sharp. "Someone could have tampered with the ropes." Eric shook his head. "Not now, Richard. We don't need rumors spreading." Amy's pulse quickened. Sabotage. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. She thought of Louise's fears, the threatening letters she'd mentioned, the shadow Amy had glimpsed outside her window last night. Could this worker's death be connected? She wanted to press Eric, but the weight of the team's stares held her back. Instead, she slipped away, her mind racing. That evening, the compound was subdued. The amulet's discovery, which should have been a triumph, was overshadowed by the worker's death. Amy sat with Louise in her room, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine from a small vase. Louise's delicate features were drawn, her blonde hair pinned loosely as she clutched a shawl. Throw around her shoulders. "It's a sign, Amy," she whispered, her eyes darting to the window. "Something evil is here. I feel it watching me." Amy poured her a glass of water, keeping her voice calm. "It was an accident, Mrs. Leidner. The desert makes everything feel bigger. Try to rest." Louise shook her head, her fingers twisting the shawl. "You don't understand. Those letters, they're not just threats. They know things. Things only Frederick would know." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My first husband. He's dead, but what if he isn't?" Amy frowned, her practical nature warring with the chill creeping up her spine. You said he died years ago. A spy, wasn't he? Surely no one could survive that. Louise's laugh was brittle. You'd be surprised what men like Frederick can survive. Or his brother, William. He hated me for what happened. If he's here. She trailed off, her gaze fixed on the window. Amy followed her gaze, her heart skipping as a shadow flickered across the glass. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable figure, cloaked in darkness, peering into the room. She leaped to her feet, flinging open the door and rushing outside. But the courtyard was empty, the desert silent under a star-strewn sky. Her breath caught as she scanned the ruins beyond, their jagged outlines like sentinels in the night. Nothing moved, but the air felt charged, as if the sand itself held its breath. Back inside, Louise was trembling, her face pale. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. "I'm not mad. It's real." Amy locked the door, her hands steady despite the thudding of her heart. "I saw something," she admitted, her voice firm. "But it's gone now. I'll stay with you tonight. No one's getting in." As Louise nodded, her eyes wide with gratitude, Amy's mind churned. The worker's death, the frayed ropes, Louise's fears. The shadow, there were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. She thought of Father Lavigne's strange detachment, Richard's whispered talk of sabotage, Joseph Mericatha's trembling hands, and that stone in the dead man's grip. Why did it feel so deliberate? She settled into a chair by Louise's bed, her journal open on her lap. The desert's silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the distant howl of a jackal. As she wrote, her pen scratching softly, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that the ruins held more than artifacts. Something or someone was watching, waiting, and the shadows on the sand were only the beginning. The next morning, Amy rose early, her eyes gritty from a sleepless night. Louise had finally drifted off, but Amy's mind was a tangle of questions. She slipped out of the compound, determined to inspect the scaffold herself. The dig site was quiet, the workers not yet arrived. The scaffold loomed above the pit, its ropes dangling like skeletal fingers. She climbed carefully, testing each rung, her nurse's precision guiding her hands. The ropes were frayed, yes, but the cuts were too clean, too precise for natural wear. Someone had tampered with them. Her breath caught as she spotted something glinting in the sand, below a small bronze tool half buried near the pit's edge. It wasn't one of the workers' tools. It was too ornate, etched with swirling patterns. She tucked it into her pocket, her pulse racing. Evidence, perhaps, but of what? As she descended, a figure emerged from the shadows of the ziggurat, Father Lavigne, his black robes stark against the sand. "Miss Letheran," he called, his voice smooth but laced with something she couldn't place. "An early riser, I see. Curious about our tragedy." Amy's hand closed round the tool in her pocket. "Just checking the scaffold," she said, keeping her tone light. "Accidents like that don't sit right with me." His eyes narrowed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The desert is full of mysteries. Some are best left buried." He turned away, vanishing into the ruins before she could respond. Amy's grip tightened on the tool. Father Lavigna's words felt like a warning, but she wasn't one to back down. She returned to the compound, the bronze tool heavy in her pocket, her resolve hardening. Louise's fears, the worker's death, the shadow at the window, they were connected, and she'd find the thread that tied them together, no matter how deep it was buried. The day unfolded in a haze of heat and suspicion. The workers returned, their chatter subdued, their eyes darting to the scaffold. Eric called a meeting, his voice tight as he addressed the team. "We've lost a good man, but the dig must continue. The amulet is a breakthrough. We owe it to history and to him too. Keep going." Richard nodded, but his eyes were on the horizon, as if searching for something. Joseph Mercado fidgeted, his notebook clutched like a shield. Father Lavigny was absent, supposedly cataloguing artifacts in the storeroom. Amy watched them all, her nurse's eye-catching, the small Tells Richard's clenched fists, Joseph's twitching fingers, Eric's forced calm. The amulet, now locked in a safe, seemed to cast a shadow over them all. That afternoon, Amy sat with Louise again, the older woman's nerves fraying further. "I saw him again," Louise whispered, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Last night, after you left, a face in the ruins, watching me. It wasn't Frederick, but it was someone who knows." Amy's stomach tightened. "Did you recognize them? Anything at all?" Louise shook her head, tears welling. "Just eyes. Cold. Like the desert at night. I'm not safe here, Amy. None of us are." Amy took her hand, her voice steady. "I'm here, Mrs. Leidner. I won't let anything happen to you." But as she spoke, her thoughts turned to the bronze tool, the cut ropes, the shadow. She needed answers, and she needed them fast that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire, Amy slipped out to the ruins. The ziggurat loomed, its stones whispering secrets older than time. She moved carefully, her flashlight cutting through the dusk. Near the base of the structure, she found fresh footprints, not the heavy tread of a worker's boots, but something lighter, deliberate. They led to a narrow crevice in the stone, barely wide enough for a person. Her heart pounded as she peered inside, the beam of her flashlight catching a glint of metal knife, its blade etched with the same swirling patterns as the tool in her pocket. Before she could reach for it, a rustle behind her made her spin. A figure stood silhouetted against the dying lighterman, his face hidden by a scarf, his eyes glinting like the knife. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, accented. "The desert keeps its secrets." Amy's hand tightened on her flashlight, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" He stepped closer, his scarf slipping to reveal a sharp jawline, a scar tracing his cheek. "Leave the ruins, nurse, before they claim you too." He vanished into the shadows before she could respond, his footsteps swallowed by the sand. Amy's breath came in short gasps, her mind racing. The knife, the tool, the footprints, they were clues, but to what? A murder, a conspiracy, or something older, tied to the amulet and the ruins themselves. She returned to the compound, her heart still pounding, the knife wrapped in her handkerchief. Louise was asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Amy sat by the window, her journal open, the desert's silence pressing against her. The shadow she'd seen last night hadn't been her imagination. Someone was watching, waiting, and the worker's death was no accident. As she wrote, her pen trembling slightly, a distant howl echoed across the sands, and the ruins seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The truth was out there, buried in the shadows, and Amy vowed to unearth it no matter the cost. Chapter 4. The masked menace. The Iraqi sun hung low, casting long, jagged shadows across the mud-brick compound at Hassani. Nurse Amy Letherin adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, the heat pressing against her like a living thing. The air was thick, with the scent of dust and ancient stone, and the distant hum of the archaeological dig shovels scraping voices, calling blended with the restless buzz of desert flies. Amy's boots crunched on the parched ground as she made her rounds, her nurse's bag slung over her shoulder. She was here for Louise Leidner, the expedition leader's wife, but the unease in the camp was starting to feel like a patient of its own, one she couldn't diagnose. Louise's revelations earlier that day still gnawed at her. Over tea in the shaded courtyard, Louise had spoken in a low, trembling voice about her first husband, Frederick Bosner, a German spy she'd married young and believed dead. He was charming, Amy, she'd said, her eyes darting to the horizon, but dangerous. I thought I'd escaped him, but now I'm not so sure. She'd mentioned his brother, William, a shadowy figure who might be seeking revenge for reasons she couldn't explain. Amy had listened, her practical mind wrestling with the story's melodrama. A spy, a vengeful brother. It sounded like something from a penny dreadful, yet Louise's fear was real, her hands shaking as she clutched her teacup. Now, as dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, Amy patrolled the compound's perimeter, her eyes scanning the low walls and scattered tents. The dig site, a sprawling maze of trenches and half-excavated ruins, lay just beyond, its ancient stones whispering secrets older than the Bible. The team was still reeling from the local worker's death 2 days ago, a man named Karim, crushed under a fallen slab in what Captain Maitland had called an accident. Amy wasn't so sure. She'd overheard Dr. Leidner and Richard Carey, the expedition's handsome architect, arguing about sabotage in hushed tones, their faces tight with worry. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustle behind her. She turned, heart quickening, but saw only the swaying of a tamarisk bush in the evening breeze. "Get a grip, Amy," she muttered to herself. She wasn't one for nerves, but the camp's atmosphere was infectious. Everyone seemed to be hiding. Something Dr. Leidner's guarded silences, Joseph MacArthur's jittery glances, Father Levigna's late-night pacing, even Richard Carey, with his easy charm and quick smile, had a shadow in his eyes when he spoke of Louise. Amy's patrol took her past the storage shed, a squat building where the team kept their tools and less valuable finds. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness within. Odd, she was sure it had been locked earlier. She pushed it open, her lantern casting a flickering glow over crates and shelves. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of earth and oil. She stepped forward, her boots scuffing against the dirt floor, and froze. Tucked behind a crate was a small wooden box, its lid half open. Inside, glinting in the lantern light, were a dozen clay tablets, their surfaces etched with cuneiform script. But something was off. The edges were too smooth, the carvings too precise, as if they'd been made yesterday, not 4,000 years ago. Forged, Amy whispered, her stomach twisting. She'd heard rumors of artifact smuggling in the region, but to find evidence here in the heart of the expedition. She reached for one of the tablets, then hesitated. If someone was planting fakes, they'd want to keep it secret. She needed to tell Dr. Leidner, perhaps Captain Maitland. But before she could decide, a shadow moved in the doorway. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sharper than she intended. No answer. The shadow vanished, and she heard the faint crunch of footsteps retreating into the night. Amy's pulse raced as she hurried to the door. Lantern raised, but the compound was empty. The desert beyond swallowed by darkness. She locked the shed, her hands unsteady, and made a mental note to report the find tomorrow. For now, Louise was her priority. Back at the main house, Amy found Louise in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed, her face pale under the dim glow of an oil lamp. The room was sparse but elegant, with a woven rug and a small table holding a clay pitcher and a peculiar tablet, the same one Amy had noticed yesterday, etched with ominous symbols she couldn't decipher. Louise's eyes flicked to the window, where the shutters were tightly closed. "Amy, thank God," Louise said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard something outside. Footsteps, I think. Or, I don't know. It's always there, watching." Amy set her bag down and crossed to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. The night was still, the ruins a dark silhouette against the starry sky. "There's nothing out there, Mrs. Leidner," she said, keeping her tone calm. "The desert plays tricks at night. Shadows and sounds, it's easy to imagine things." Louise shook her head, her fingers twisting the hem of her shawl. "It's not my imagination. Someone's out there. I feel it." Ever since those letters started arriving, she trailed off, her gaze dropping to the tablet on the table. Amy followed. "Poor, that tablet, where did it come from? It's not like the others in the workroom." Louise hesitated, then spoke softly. "Father Lavigny gave it to me. He said it was a protective charm, something the ancients used to ward off evil spirits. But it doesn't feel protective. It feels wrong." Amy frowned. Father Lavigny, the expedition's epigraphist, was an odd figure, French monk, with a scholar's mind and a habit of wandering the dig site at odd hours. She'd caught him last night near the ruins, his lantern bobbing like a willow, the wisp. When she'd asked what he was doing, he'd muttered something about studying the stars and hurried off. Now, This tablet raised her suspicions further. Was he genuinely trying to help Louise, or was there something more sinister at play? "Let me take a look," Amy said, picking up the tablet. It was heavier than it looked, the clay cool against her fingers. The symbols were intricate, a mix of wedges and curves, but one stood out a jagged shape like a broken star. She'd seen it before, on a sketch in Dr. Leidner's office, labeled as a curse mark from an ancient Sumerian tomb. A chill ran through her. "Mrs. Leidner, did Father Lavigny say where he found this?" "He said it was from the lower levels of the dig," Louise replied. "But he was vague about it. He's always vague." Her voice cracked. "Amy, I'm scared. What if Frederick is alive? What if he's here, pretending to be one of them?" Amy set the tablet down, her mind racing. "Let's not jump to conclusions. I'll keep an eye out tonight, and we'll talk to Dr. Leidner in the morning. For now, try to rest. I'll stay close." Louise nodded, but her eyes were wide, haunted. Amy dimmed the lamp and stepped into the hall, her thoughts a tangle of forged tablets, shadowy figures, and Louise's cryptic fears. She decided to make one more round of the compound before bed, her lantern casting long fingers of light across the walls. The night was cooler now, the stars sharp as diamonds overhead. Amy moved silently, her ears straining for any sound. She passed the dining tent, where the team had eaten a tense supper earlier, their conversation stilted and eyes avoiding one another. Joseph Mercado had spilled his wine, his hands trembling, while Marie, his sharp-tongued wife, snapped at him to pull himself together. Richard Carey had been unusually quiet, his gaze lingering on Louise, and Father Lavigny had excused himself early, claiming a headache. As Amy neared the edge of the compound, she heard it a faint scraping, like stone on stone. It came from the direction of the ruins, where the team had uncovered the golden amulet just days ago. She hesitated, then moved toward the sound, her lantern low to avoid drawing attention. The ruins loomed ahead, their jagged outlines like the bones of some ancient beast. She stepped into a trench, her boots sinking into loose earth, and followed the sound to a partially excavated chamber, its entrance half hidden by a tarp dot inside. The air was damp, smelling of clay and thyme. The scraping grew louder, and Amy's light caught a figure crouched in the shadows, hunched over a stone slab. It was Father Lavigny, his cassock dusted with dirt, a small pickaxe in his hand. He was prying at the slab, muttering in French under his breath. Amy's heart thudded. Was he uncovering something or hiding it? "Father Lavigny," she called, her voice steady despite her nerves. He froze, then turned, his face pale in the lantern light. "Nurse Leatheran," he said, his accent thick. "You startled me. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd examine this section." At midnight, Amy raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait for morning?" He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "The inscriptions here are delicate. Moonlight is kinder to them than the sun's glare." His smile was tight, unconvincing. "You should be with Mrs. Leidner." "No, she is unwell, I hear." "She's resting," Amy said, her eyes flicking to the slab. It was etched with more of those jagged symbols, like the one on Louise's tablet. "What are these markings?" "Mrs. Leidner said you gave her a tablet like this, called it a protective charm." Lavigne's eyes narrowed just for a moment. "A trinket," he said, waving a hand. "The locals believe such things ward off evil. I thought it might ease her mind." Amy wasn't buying it. "And this?" She gestured to the slab. "Is this another trinket?" He hesitated, then laughed softly. "You are observant, nurse. This is part of a burial chamber, possibly a priest's. The symbols are curses, meant to protect the dead from robbers." Fascinating, but harmless. Harmless. The word hung in the air, heavy with doubt. Amy nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I'll let you get back to it then. Good night, Father." She turned to leave, but not before catching a glimpse of something metallic in his pocket, a small knife, its handle carved with intricate designs. Her skin prickled. Was it a tool for the dig, or something else? She filed the detail away. Her nurse's instinct for observation sharpened by the camp's growing mysteries. Back at the compound, Amy checked on Louise, who was finally asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. She sat by the window, keeping watch, her mind replaying the night's events. The forged tablets, Lavigne's midnight digging, Louise's talk of a vengeful brother, it all wove together, but the pattern was still unclear. She was about to close her eyes when a scream tore through the night, sharp and raw, from Louise's room. Amy bolted upright, her lantern nearly toppling. She rushed to Louise's door, flinging it open. Louise was sitting up in bed, her face ashen, a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. The shutters were still closed, the room undisturbed, but Louise was trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "Amy," she gasped, holding out the paper. "It was under my door. Someone was here." Amy took the note, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The writing was jagged, scrawled in black ink. "You can't escape me. I see you in the shadows." No signature, but the implication was clear. Amy's eyes darted to the door, then back to Louise. "Stay here," she said, her voice firm. "Lock the door behind me." She stepped into the hall, lantern raised, and checked the corridor. Empty. The compound was silent, the night pressing. In like a held breath, whoever had left the note was gone or hiding. Amy returned to Louise, who was clutching the tablet now, as if it could protect her. "We'll show this to Dr. Leidner and Captain Maitland tomorrow," Amy said, keeping her tone calm. "No one's getting in here tonight." Louise nodded, but her eyes were distant, lost in fear. Amy stayed with her, sitting by the bed, her mind racing. The forged tablets, the masked figure she'd seen last night, Lavigne's suspicious behavior. And now this note, it was all connected. She was sure of it. But how? And who was behind it? Frederick Bosner, risen from the dead. His brother, William. Or someone closer, hiding among the team. As the first light of dawn crept through the shutters, Amy made a silent vow. She'd keep Louise safe, no matter what it took, but deep down, she knew the desert was hiding more than ancient ruins. Something or someone was watching, waiting, and the next move could be deadly. Chapter 5. Poirot's arrival. The Iraqi sun hung low, casting a bronze glow over the sprawling archaeological dig near Hassani. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, stirred by a restless desert wind that seemed to whisper secrets older than the ruins themselves. Nurse Amy Letherin stood at the edge of the compound, her khaki skirt fluttering against her calves, her eyes fixed on the horizon where a lone car kicked up a plume of sand. The vehicle, an unassuming black sedan, looked out of place in the barren expanse, like a beetle scuttling across a vast parchment. She squinted, shielding her eyes with a hand, as the car slowed near the mud-brick gate. "Is that him, Sheila?" Riley asked, sidling up beside Amy. The doctor's daughter was all sharp angles and sharper tongue, her auburn hair tied back with a scarf that had seen better days. "This Poirot fellow your patient's been yammering about." Amy nodded, her lips pursed. "Dr. Riley sent for him. Says he's the best there is. Solved some case in Syria, apparently. And now he's here to poke around after, well, you know." Her voice dipped, unwilling to linger on the local worker's supposed accident that had left the camp uneasy, like a pot simmering too close to boiling. Sheila snorted, crossing her arms. "A detective in this dust bowl. He'll ruin, pursues before he finds anything useful. Bet he's some pompous city type, all talk and no grit." Amy didn't reply, but her stomach tightened. Louise Leidner's pale, anxious face flashed in her mind, those wide eyes, the trembling hands, the whispered fears about threatening letters and shadows in the night. The dig was a cauldron of tension, and Amy hired to nurse Louise through. Her nerves felt like she'd stumbled into a play where everyone knew their lines but her. The car door opened, and a figure stepped out, brushing dust from a pristine black suit with deliberate care. "Good heavens," Amy muttered under her breath. "He's small." Hercule Poirot was not what she'd expected, barely taller than her shoulder, with a moustache so meticulously waxed it seemed to defy the desert's chaos. He carried himself with an air of unshakable precision. His patent leather shoes gleamed improbably, as if the sand dared not touch them. He adjusted his hotter, neat fedora, absurdly formal for the setting and surveyed the compound with eyes like polished obsidian, sharp and unyielding. Behind Pym, a driver unloaded a single leather valise, which Poirot waved off with a gloved hand. "Bonjour," he called, his voice carrying a melodic lilt that cut through the dry air. "I am Hercule Poirot, invited by Dr. Giles Riley. I trust I am expected." Amy stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir. I'm Amy Letherin, nurse to Mrs. Leidner. Dr. Riley's at the dig site, but he said to make you comfortable." Poirot's gaze flicked over her, not unkindly, but with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Comfort, mademoiselle, is a state of mind. I find it wherever my little gray cells are engaged." He tapped his temple with a gloved finger, a faint smile curling beneath his moustache. And you are observant, Nan. A nurse sees much that others miss. Amy flushed, unsure if he was teasing. I try to keep my eyes open, Mr. Poirot. Excellent, he said, clasping his hands behind his back. Then you shall be most useful. Sheila, still lounging against a crate, raised an eyebrow. You're here about the worker, then? Poor sod, who fell into the pit. Captain Maitland says it was an accident. Poirot's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Captain Maitland is a man of authority, mademoiselle, but authority does not always see truth. I am here to illuminate. He turned to Amy. Please, Mademoiselle Leatheron, show me to my quarters. Then I should like to meet Madame Leidner. As they walked through the compound, Amy stole glances at Poirot. His fastidiousness was almost comically step-measured, avoiding puddles of dust as if they were pools of acid. The camp itself was a patchwork of mud-brick buildings and canvas tents, ringed by the sprawling dig site where workers sifted through centuries of sand and stone. The air smelled of baked earth and sweat, undercut by the faint tang of ancient clay. Voices drifted from the dining hall, where the team was finishing lunch. Their conversations clipped and tense. "Your patient, Madame Leidner," Poirot said as they reached a low building shaded by a date palm. "She is unwell, Not physically," Amy admitted, pushing the door open. "She's nervous, frightened, really. Says she's been getting letters, threatening ones, from someone who should be dead. Her first husband, Frederick." Bosner Poirot's eyebrows lifted, twin arches of curiosity. "Should be dead," a most intriguing phrase. "And you, mademoiselle, what do you make of these letters?" Amy hesitated, setting his valise on a cot. The room was sparse. A wooden chair, a small table with a cracked jug of water, but Poirot surveyed it with the satisfaction of a king entering a palace. "I haven't seen them myself," she said. Mrs. Leidner says they're vague, menacing. Why anyone would bother her out here, I can't fathom." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And yet you are uneasy. Your voice, it betrays you. Something in this place troubles you, Nan." She swallowed, caught off guard. "It's just, the camp feels wrong. Everyone's on edge. There's the worker's death. And then last night, I saw something, a shadow, maybe, outside Louise's window. Gone before I could be sure." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A shadow, terse, interesant. You will tell me more, but first I must meet the lady herself." Louise Leidner was in her room, a dim space with whitewashed walls and a narrow window that let in slivers of sunlight. She sat on the edge of her bed, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. At the sight of Poirot she stood, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but trembling. "Dr. Riley said you could help. I don't know where to begin." Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courtly. "Begin, madame, with what frightens you. Fear is a map, and I am a most excellent cartographer." Amy watched as Louise recounted her story, the threatening letters, the whispers of her past. Her Proust husband, Frederick Bosner, a German spy she believed had died years ago. He was executed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Or so I thought. But these letters, there in his hand. He says I betrayed him, that I'll pay for it. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled. When she finished, he asked, "These letters, Madame, may I see them?" Louise hesitated, then crossed to a small wooden box on her dresser. She unlocked it with a trembling hand and handed him a single sheet of paper. Amy craned her neck, catching a glimpse of jagged handwriting in black ink. "You cannot escape the past. I am watching." The words sent a chill down her spine. Poirot studied the letter, his expression unreadable. "And this is the only one you have kept?" Louise nodded. "I burned the others. They frightened me too much." "Pity," Poirot murmured, folding the letter carefully. "But no matter. The mind of Hercule Poirot is a net, and no detail escapes it." He turned to Amy, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Letherin, you mentioned a shadow. Describe it. S'il vous plaît." Amy recounted the fleeting figure she'd seen the previous night, its silhouette blurred against the moonlight. "Up store, I think, wearing something loose, like a cloak or robe. I couldn't see a face." Louise gasped, clutching her handkerchief. "It's him. It must be Frederick, or someone pretending to be him." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Madame, do not let fear cloud your reason. Shadows are many in the desert, and not all are ghosts." He turned to Amy. "You will show me this window, mademoiselle, and then I wish to see where the unfortunate worker met his end." The dig site was a labyrinth of trenches and scaffolds, dotted with workers in keffiyehs and archaeologists hunched over finds. The air buzzed with the clink of tools and the murmur of voices, but an undercurrent of unease lingered, as if the earth itself held its breath. Dr. Hercule Leidner, Louise's husband, greeted Poirot with a weary handshake. His lean frame and sunburnt face spoke of long days under the desert sun, but his eyes were shadowed with worry. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice clipped, "Giles Riley speaks highly of you. I hope you can put this nonsense to rest. The worker's death was a tragedy, nothing more." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Tragedy, monsieur, often wears the mask of accident. I understand a single spot of blood was found near the body. Most curious, Nan." Leidner frowned, glancing at Amy. "The man fell into a pit, broke his neck. Captain Maitland said there was no foul play." "And yet," Poirot said, stepping delicately around a pile of excavated earth, "a single spot of blood suggests a story the neck does not tell. Show me this pit." The pit was a jagged gash in the earth, cordoned off with rope. Amy stood back as Poirot crouched, examining the ground with a small magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. The workers nearby paused, their eyes darting between the detective and their tasks. Poirot's fingers brushed the dirt, pausing at a small, dark stain. "Blood, indeed," he murmured, "but not enough for a wound of significance. Tell me, Monsieur Leidner, who was the last to see this man alive? Leidner hesitated. I believe it was Richard Carey. He was supervising the trench that day. Poirot stood, brushing his hands with a handkerchief. Monsieur Carey, I should like to speak with him. And the other's father, Lavigny, Monsieur Mercado, Mademoiselle Johnson, all must be questioned. The afternoon passed in a blur of interviews. Poirot sat in the dining hall, a makeshift office, as the team filtered in one by one. Amy lingered, taking notes at his request, her pencil scratching against her notebook. Richard Carey, the charming archaeologist with a disarming smile, spoke of the workers' carelessness, his tone smooth but his hands fidgeting. Joseph Mercado, jittery and sweating, rambled about the dig's pressure, his eyes darting to the door. Father Lavigny, the enigmatic monk, answered in measured tones. His knowledge of ancient languages impressive, but his reasons for joining the dig vague. Anne Johnson, Dr. Leidner's assistant, was brisk, almost defensive, her eyes narrowing. When Poirot mentioned the blood dot, each conversation revealed a new thread in the camp's tangled web: grudges, rivalries, unspoken fears. Amy's head spun, but Poirot remained unruffled, his questions sharp as a scalpel. The psychology of fear, he said to her between interviews, is a most powerful force. It distorts, it conceals, it reveals. Madame Leidner's fear is beacon, mademoiselle, and we must follow where it leads. As dusk fell, the camp gathered for dinner, the air thick with tension. Poirot sat at the head of the table, his presence like a stone dropped into a still pond. The team ate in near silence, forks scraping against plates, eyes avoiding his gaze. Amy noticed Sheila whispering to David Emmett, a quiet dig worker, their heads bent close. Marie Mercado, Joseph's wife, shot venomous glances at Louise, who sat pale and silent beside her husband. Poirot raised a glass of water, his voice cutting through the quiet. Mise Amis, a toast to truth. It hides, but it cannot run. Tonight I urge you to lock your doors, for danger walks among us. The words landed like a thunderclap. Louise's fork clattered to her plate, and Amy's heart thudded. She met Poirot's eyes, and for a moment she saw something flicker in them, not fear, but certainty, as if he already glimpsed the shape of the mystery. That night, Amy lay awake in her room, the desert's silence pressing against her ears. Poirot's warning echoed in her mind, and she checked her lock twice before climbing into bed. The compound was quiet, save for the occasional creak of a shutter or the distant howl of a jackal. She thought of Louise, alone in her room, and the shadow she'd seen the night before. Was it real or a trick of the moonlight? A soft knock startled her. She sat up, clutching her blanket. "Who's there?" "It is I, Poirot," came the reply, his voice low but clear. "May I enter, mademoiselle?" She opened the door, finding him in a silk dressing-gown, his mustache still impeccably waxed despite the hour. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, stepping inside, "but I have a question. The shadow you saw, did it move with purpose, or was it merely passing?" Amy frowned, replaying the memory. It paused, I think, like it was watching her window. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "Bon, you are a most valuable observer, Mademoiselle Leatherin. Tomorrow we shall dig deep pawn only into the earth, but into the hearts of those who walk it." He bid her good night, but as he turned to leave, Amy caught a glint of something in his hand, a small folded piece of paper, like the letter Louise had shown him. The door closed, and she was alone again, the desert's vastness pressing in. She lay back, her mind racing. Poirot's arrival had shifted something in the camp, like a key turning in a lock. Whatever secrets lay buried here, she knew he would unearth them, one meticulous step at a time. Chapter 6. The locked room. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the Iraqi desert in hues of molten gold, when the scream shattered the morning stillness. Amy Leatherin, roused from a fitful sleep, bolted upright in her narrow cot, her heart hammering. The sound had come from the direction of Louise Leidner's room, sharp and raw, like the cry of a wounded animal. Pooh! She threw on her robe, her nurse's instincts overriding the grogginess of dawn, and dashed down the mud-brick corridor of the Hassani Dig compound. The air was thick with the scent of dust and baked earth, the compound still cloaked in the quiet of early morning. The other team members, archaeologists, assistants, and laborers, were only beginning to stir, their muffled voices filtering through the thin walls. Amy reached Louise's door, her hand hesitating on the handle. It was locked, the heavy iron bolt unmoved. She knocked, her knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. "Mrs. Leidner, are you all right?" Her voice trembled, betraying the unease that had been building since her arrival at the dig. "Don't know," answer. Only silence, heavy and oppressive, pressed back. Amy's pulse quickened. She rattled the handle, then pounded harder, her calls growing more urgent. Mrs. Leidner opened the door. Footsteps thudded behind her, and she turned to see Dr. Eric Leidner, his face pale and drawn, his nightshirt hastily tucked into trousers. "What's happened?" he demanded, his voice hoarse with sleep and alarm. "It's Louise," Amy said, stepping aside. She screamed, but the door's locked, and she's not answering. Dr. Leidner's eyes widened, and he shoved past her, throwing his weight against the door. It didn't budge. "Louise!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Louise, open the door." Richard Carey, the expedition's handsome architect, appeared next, his dark hair disheveled, his shirt half-buttoned. "What's going on?" he asked, his gaze flicking between Amy and Dr. Leidner. "We need to get in," Amy said, her voice steady despite the dread coiling in her stomach. "Something's wrong." Carey nodded, his jaw tightening, and he joined Dr. Leidner in battering the door. The wood groaned but held fast. By now others had gathered. Marie Mercado, her eyes wide with fear. Joseph Mercado, his hands trembling as he clutched a cigarette, and Father Levigny, his calm demeanor at odds with the chaos. Sheila Riley, Dr. Riley's sharp-tongued daughter, pushed through, her auburn hair loose and wild. "Move aside," Sheila snapped, producing a small knife from her pocket. She knelt by the lock, working the blade with surprising dexterity. "This old bolt's no match for me." The lock clicked, and the door swung inward with a creak. The room was dim, the heavy shutters blocking most of the morning light. Amy's eyes adjusted, and then she froze. Louise Leidner lay sprawled across her bed, her golden hair fanned out like a halo, her face pale and still. A single brutal wound marred her temple, blood pooling on the pillow and seeping into the woven rug. Beneath, her eyes, wide open, stared blankly at the ceiling. As if fixed on some unseen horror, Dr. Leidner stumbled forward, a choked sob escaping him. "Louise, no." He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. Amy forced herself to move, her training kicking in. She checked for a pulse, her fingers pressing against Louise's wrist, then her neck. Nothing. The body was still warm, but life had fled. "She's gone," Amy whispered, her voice barely audible. Carrie swore under his breath, his hands clenched into fists. Marie Mercado let out a wail, burying her face in her husband's shoulder. Joseph muttered something incoherent, his cigarette dropping to the floor. Father Lavigny crossed himself, murmuring a prayer in Latin, his eyes never leaving the body. Sheila, still by the door, was the first to speak. How the hell did this happen? The door was locked, and the windows barred. She pointed to the iron bars crisscrossing the small window, their shadows stark against the wall. Amy's gaze followed, noting the bars were intact, the window latched from the inside. The room felt like a sealed tomb, the air heavy with the metallic temps of blood. Her eyes darted to the rug, where a dark stain spread outward from the bed, and then to the window frame, where a faint scratch gleamed in the wood, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Hercule Poirot's arrival was like a ripple through still water. He stepped into the room, his small frame immaculate despite the desert's dust, his mustache perfectly waxed, his eyes sharp as a hawk's swept the scene, taking in every detail: the body, the blood, the locked door, the barred window. Captain Maitland, the local policeman, followed close behind, his weathered face grim. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of steel. A puzzle most perplexing. A locked room, a death by violence, and yet no sign of entry or exit. Captain Maitland scratched his head, his boots scuffing the floor. "It's impossible," he said gruffly. "No one could have gotten in here. The lock's solid, and those bars haven't been touched in years." Poirot's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Impossible, you say?" None, Capitaine. The impossible is merely the possible that has not yet been explained." He knelt beside the bed, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the blood-stained rug without touching it. "Mademoiselle Leatherin," he said, glancing at Amy. "You were the first to hear the scream." "We?" Amy nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. It woke me. I came straight here, but the door was locked, and she didn't answer. And before that," Poirot's eyes bore into hers, not unkindly, but with an intensity that made her feel exposed. What did Madame Leidner say to you last night? Anything of note?" Amy hesitated, her mind racing back to the previous evening. Louise had been restless, her delicate features drawn with fear. They had sat together in this very room, the oil lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. Louise's voice had been low, almost a whisper, as she spoke of a face in the shadows watching her from the ruins. Amy had dismissed it as nerves, a product of the threatening letters and the isolation of the desert. But now those words felt like a prophecy. "She was afraid," Amy said finally. "She mentioned seeing a face at night out in the ruins. She thought someone was watching her." Poirot's eyebrows rose, and he turned to Dr. Leidner, who was still kneeling by the bed, his face buried in his hands. "Monsieur, did your wife speak of this face to you?" Dr. Leidner looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. She mentioned it once or twice. I thought it was her imagination. She was so fragile, you see. The letters, the strain of the digit was too much for her." Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the window. He rose and crossed the room, examining the bars and the scratch on the frame. His fingers hovered over the mark, his expression unreadable. "Curio," he muttered. "A scratch, so small, yet so significant. And this rug," he pointed to the blood-stained weave, its intricate patterns marred by the spreading crimson. "It tells a story, does it not?" Captain Maitland frowned. "It's just blood, Mr. Poirot, from the wound." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "But blood, like all things, has a voice. We must listen carefully." The team gathered in the dining hall an hour later, the air thick with tension and grief. The sun was higher now, its heat seeping through the walls, but the room felt cold, as if Louise's death had drained it of warmth. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small stature commanding despite the chaos around him. Amy sat near the back, her notebook open, jotting down observations, as she always did when her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. "Monsieur et Madame Poirot," began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are faced with a crime most grave. Madame Leidner was struck down in her own room, a room locked and barred, with no apparent means of entry or escape. Yet, I assure you, the killer is among us." A gasp rippled through the group. Marie Mercado clutched her husband's arm, her eyes darting to the others. Joseph Mercado lit another cigarette, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the match. Richard Carey leaned against the wall, his face a mask of controlled grief, while Sheila Riley crossed her arms, her expression defiant. Father Levigny sat quietly, his hands folded, but Amy noticed his fingers tighten briefly, a flicker of unease. "The killer is here?" Dr. Leidner asked, his voice hollow. "But how? The door, the window, the how is a matter for the little grey cells," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "But the why, that is where we begin." Madame Leidner was afraid. She spoke of letters, of a past that haunted her, and now she is dead. Who among you knew her secrets? Who among you had reason to wish her harm? His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face, and Amy felt a chill as his eyes met hers. She had no secrets to hide, but the weight of his scrutiny made her feel complicit, as if the very act of being here implicated her in the crime. "Mr. Poirot," Sheila said, breaking the silence, "you're saying one of us did this? That's absurd. We're archaeologists, not murderers." Poirot's smile was thin. "Mademoiselle, the human heart is a labyrinth, and even the most learned among us may hide a darkness. I will find the truth, but I will need your cooperation. Tell me everything, every glance, every word, every shadow you have seen." The team exchanged uneasy looks, the weight of his words settling over them like dust. Amy's pen scratched, plus her notebook, recording the tension in their faces. The way Joseph's cigarette trembled, the way Caris's jaw tightened when Poirot mentioned secrets. She thought of the scratch on the window frame, the blood-stained rug, and Louise's last words about a face in the shadows. The pieces were there, but they refused to fit together. As the meeting dispersed, Poirot caught Amy's arm, his grip gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle Letherin, a word." She followed him to a corner of the courtyard, where the sun beat down mercilessly, casting stark shadows across the mud-brick walls. "You are observant," he said, his voice low. "You see what others miss. Tell me, what did you notice in Madame Leidner's room?" Amy hesitated, her mind replaying the scene. "The rug," she said finally. "The blood was wrong. Somehow it spread too evenly, like it was poured, not splattered. And the scratch on the window frame, it was fresh, like someone had pried at it." Poirot's eyes gleamed, hers beamed. "You have the makings of a detective, mademoiselle. Keep your eyes open and your door locked. The killer is clever, but they are not invisible." That night Amy lay awake, the desert's silence pressing against her ears. The compound was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath, as if the very walls were waiting for the next scream. She thought of Louise, her beauty and her fear, and of the locked room that had become her tomb. The scratch on the window frame haunted her, a tiny detail that felt like a key she couldn't yet turn. She rose and checked her own door, ensuring the bolt was secure. Poirot's warning echoed in her mind. "Danger walks among us." She returned to her cot, her notebook open beside her, and wrote, "The desert hides its secrets well, but not from Hercule Poirot. I only hope we find the truth before it claims another life." The chapter closed with the distant howl of a jackal, a mournful cry that seemed to carry the weight of the ruins themselves, ancient and unyielding, guarding their secrets in the endless sands. Chapter 7. Digging into motives, the Iraqi sun hung low, painting the desert in hues of amber and gold. But its warmth did little to thaw the chill that had settled over the archaeological camp near Hassani. Nurse Amy Letherin sat on a rickety stool outside her room, her journal open on her lap, the pages curling slightly in the dry heat. The murder of Louise Leidner, found dead in her locked room with a single blow to the head, had fractured the fragile camaraderie of the dig team. Hercule Poirot's arrival had stirred the pot further, his sharp eyes and cryptic remarks unsettling the already jittery crew. Amy's pen hovered over the paper. her mind replaying the events of the past days, the threatening letters, the masked figure in the night, and now Poirot's declaration that the killer was among them. The camp, once a haven of scholarly pursuit, now felt like a labyrinth of suspicion. The day began with a strained breakfast in the dining tent. The clatter of tin plates and the murmur of forced pleasantries couldn't mask the tension. Amy watched the team, her nurse's eye trained to spot signs of distress. Richard Carey, the handsome archaeologist with a reputation for charm, pushed his eggs around his plate, his jaw tight. Muddy Mercado, Joseph's sharp-tuned wife, sipped her tea with a scowl, her eyes darting to her husband, whose hands trembled as he reached for his cup. Dr. Eric Leidner, the expedition leader and Louise's widower, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of grief. Though Amy noticed his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the tablecloth, Father Lavigny, the enigmatic epigraphist, was absent, supposedly cataloguing artifacts in the workroom. And then there was Poirot, perched like a curious bird at the table's edge, his moustache twitching as he observed the group with an air detached amusement. Monsieur Poirot, Amy ventured, breaking the silence. You said last night the killer is among us. Do you have a suspect? Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. She wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and he tilted his head, his fork poised over a piece of flatbread. Mademoiselle Letherin, the mind of a killer is like a mosaic. Each piece, motive, opportunity, character must be placed with care to reveal the picture. I have many pieces, but the pattern, it is not yet complete. He paused, his gaze sweeping the table. But rest assured, the little grey cells, they work tirelessly. Richard Carey snorted, setting his cup down with a clink. That's all well and good, Poirot, but we're not in a drawing-room in London. This is the desert. People die out here, accidents, feuds, heat stroke. Why all this talk of murder? Maybe it was just bad luck. Bad luck does not lock a door and strike a woman with precision, Poirot replied, his tone mild but cutting. No, Monsieur Carey, this was no accident, and you, I think, know more than you say. Carey's face flushed, and he leaned forward, his voice low. What's that supposed to mean? I cared about Louise more than most here. If you're accusing me, not accusing, merely observing, Poirot interrupted, raising a hand. Your affection for Madame Leidner was evident, but affection, it can breed jealousy, Nan, or perhaps guilt. The table went silent. Marie Macather's cup rattled against its saucer, and Joseph's trembling hands spilled coffee onto the tablecloth. Dr. Leidner cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. That's enough, Poirot. Richard was a friend to Louise. We all were. This speculation isn't helping. Poirot smiled faintly, undeterred. Forgive me, Doctor, but to find the truth, we must dig as you do in your ruins. And sometimes what we uncover is not pleasant. Amy scribbled a note in her journal. Poirot suspects Carey. But why? She glanced at Marie, whose eyes burned with something like triumph, as she watched Carey squirm. There was no love lost between Marie and Louise. Amy knew. Marie's sharp comments about Louise's beauty and airs had been a constant undercurrent at the dig. Could jealousy have driven her to more than words? After breakfast, Poirot requested private interviews with each team member, starting with Carrie. Amy, tasked with assisting Poirot, followed him to the small office tent, where maps and artifact sketches littered the desk. Carey slumped into a chair, his charm replaced by defensiveness. "Monsieur Carey," Poirot began, settling behind the desk. "You and Madame Leidner were close, were you not?" Carey crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "We were friends, worked together for years. She was special. But if you're implying I had anything to do with her death, you're barking up the wrong tree." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. "A friend, you say? Yet I hear whispers of more than friendship. An affair, perhaps." Before her marriage to Dr. Leidner, Carris' jaw tightened, and for a moment Amy thought he might bolt. Instead, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, fine. Yes, we were involved years ago, before Eric. It was brief, and it ended amicably. Louise was happy with Eric. I respected that. Did you?" Poirot's tone was gentle, almost pitying. "Love, it lingers, Nan. And when it lingers, it can turn to resentment. Perhaps you resented her happiness with another." Carey slammed a fist on the desk, making Amy jump. "That's absurd. I cared for her, yes, but I didn't kill her. I was in the artifact room when it happened, cataloguing with Bill Coleman. Ask him." Poirot nodded, jotting a note. "I shall. But tell me, monsieur, did Madame Leidner ever speak of her first husband, Frederick Bosner?" Carey hesitated, his eyes flickering. "She mentioned him once, said he was a mistake from her youth, thought he was dead. Why?" "Because," Poirot said, tapping his pencil against the desk, "someone sent her threatening letters, claiming to be Bosner, or perhaps his brother, William. You know of him?" Carey shook his head, but Amy caught a flicker of unease in his expression. "Never heard of William. Look, Poirot, I don't know who did this, but it wasn't me. I swear. It—" Poirot dismissed him with a wave, and Amy noted the sweat on Carris' brow as he left. "Do you believe him?" she asked, her voice low. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mademoiselle, in a murder, everyone lies a little. The trick is to find the lie that hides the truth." Next was Marie Mercado. She entered the tent with a defiant tilt to her chin, her dark eyes flashing. "I suppose you think I hated Louise enough to kill her," she said before Poirot could speak. "Well, I didn't. She was vain, manipulative, but I wouldn't dirty my hands." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Strong words, madame. Yet I hear you spoke often of her flaws. Jealousy. It is a powerful motive." Marie laughed, a brittle sound. "Jealous of her, please." She flaunted her beauty, her hold over Eric, over Richard. "But I have my Joseph, and that's enough. I didn't need to kill her to feel better about myself." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning back, "your husband here is not well. His hands, they shake. His eyes, they are haunted. Is there something you wish to tell me about Monsieur Mercado? Marie's face paled, and she gripped the edge of the desk. Leave Joseph out of this. He's stressed. The dig, the heat, too much for him. Or perhaps, Poirot suggested, it is something more. A dependency, perhaps. Opium, morphine. Marie stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. You're fishing, Poirot. Joseph's fine. We're fine. If you want a killer, look at Kerry or that so-called priest, not us. She stormed out, leaving Amy stunned. Opium, she whispered. Is that why Joseph's hands shake? Poirot nodded slowly. It is a possibility. Addiction. It clouds the mind, makes one vulnerable to manipulation or desperation. We must watch Monsieur Mercado closely. The interviews continued, each revealing new cracks in the team's facade. Joseph Mercado was evasive, his answers vague, his eyes darting to the tent flap as if expecting rescue. He admitted to arguments with Louise over funding for the dig, but insisted they were professional, not personal. Dr. Leidner, when questioned, spoke of Louise with reverence, but Amy caught a flicker of something guilt, fear, when Poirot pressed him about the threatening letters. She was terrified, Leidner admitted, but I thought it was just nerves. I should have listened. As the day wore on, Amy's journal filled with observations, Carys' defensiveness, Marie's hostility, Joseph's tremors, Leidner's grief. It all feels like a puzzle, but the pieces don't fit. She wandered the camp, her nurse's instincts urging her to dig deeper. Near the artifact room, she overheard a heated exchange between Bill Coleman and Sheila Riley, the doctor's outspoken daughter, who had arrived that morning to visit her father. You're hiding something, Bill, Sheila snapped, her voice carrying on the desert wind. I saw you sneaking around the ruins last night. What were you doing? Nothing, Bill protested, his freckled face red. Just checking the equipment. You know how valuable those artifacts are, Sheila scoffed. Don't play innocent. If you're mixed up in this, Amy stepped forward, interrupting. Sheila, Bill, what's going on? Sheila turned, her eyes blazing. Ask him. He's been skulking around since Louise died. I don't trust him. Bill glared, but said nothing, stomping off toward the dig site. Amy made a mental note to tell Poirot. Sheila's accusation added another layer to the mystery, and Amy wondered if Bill's youth and inexperience hid a darker secret. That evening, as the camp gathered for dinner, the air was thick with unease. Poirot had spent the afternoon examining Louise's room again, muttering about the blood-stained rug and the scratch on the window frame. Amy sat beside him, her eyes scanning the team. Father Livigny, back from his work, seemed unusually quiet, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass. Then, as dessert was served, a shout came from the dining tent's entrance. Captain Maitland burst in, holding a folded paper aloft. Found this pinned to the dining room wall, he said, his voice grim. It's addressed to all of you. Poirot took the letter, his expression unreadable. He unfolded it and read aloud. You think you're safe, but the desert sees all. Confess, or the next death will be yours. A gasp rippled through the group. Marie clutched Joseph's arm. Kara's face drained of color, and Leidner's fork clattered to the table. Amy's heart pounded as she met Poirot's gaze. He folded the letter carefully, his voice calm but firm. "It seems, Mies Amos, the killer grows bold. But boldness, it leads to mistakes. And mistakes, they lead to me." As the team dispersed, Amy lingered, her journal open. She wrote another letter, another threat. Poirot's closing in, but the camp feels like a powder keg. Who's next? The desert night closed in, the stars cold and unyielding, and Amy couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was buried just out of reach, waiting to be unearthed. Next morning, Poirot gathered the team at the dig site, where the golden amulet from the 4th millennium BC lay under guard. The air was thick with dust and suspicion, the workers casting wary glances at the archaeologists. Poirot paced before the group, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "yesterday's letter confirms what I suspected. The killer seeks to control through fear. But fear, it reveals as much as it hides. Let us consider the motives." He turned to Carrie. "Monsieur, your love for Madame Leidner, it was not a secret. Did it drive you to anger when she chose another?" Carrie bristled. "I told you I moved on. I didn't kill her." Poirot nodded, then faced Marie. "Madame Mercado, your dislike for Madame Leidner was clear. Did it fester into something more final?" Marie's eyes flashed. "I despised her, yes, but murder, that's not my style. And you, Monsieur Mercado," Poirot continued, his gaze piercing. "Your hands, they betray a struggle. Did Madame Leidner know of your difficulty? Did she threaten to expose you?" Joseph's face crumpled, and he looked away. "She knew nothing," he muttered. "Leave me alone." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he moved on to Leidner. "Doctor, your wife feared a ghost from her past. Did you know more than you told her? Did you fail to protect her?" Leidner's voice broke. "I loved her. I'd have died to save her." Poirot paused, letting the words hang. Then he turned to the group. "Each of you has a motive, love, jealousy, fear, greed. But the truth, it lies in the details. The blot on the rug, the scratch on the window. The letters, they point to a mind both cunning and desperate." Amy watched the team's reactions, her nurse's training picking up the subtle signs. Carrie's clenched fists, Marie's tight lips, Joseph's shaking hands, Leidner's haunted eyes. Father Levigny, standing apart, seemed almost too calm, his fingers stroking a small clay tablet in his pocket. Amy's suspicion of him deepened. Was he really a priest, or something else entirely? As the group dispersed, Poirot pulled Amy aside. "Mademoiselle, your eyes, they see much. Tell me, what do you make of Monsieur Mercader's tremors?" Amy hesitated, then spoke. "I've seen it before, in patients. It could be nerves, but it's more like withdrawal. Morphine, maybe. If Louise knew, she might have had leverage over him." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Exactement, and leverage. It can provoke desperate acts. Keep watching, mademoiselle." you are my eyes in this camp." The day unfolded with a frenetic energy, the team throwing themselves into the dig as if work could bury their fears. Amy helped catalogue artifacts, her mind racing. She noticed Joseph slipping away from the group, heading toward the storage tent. Curious, she followed, keeping her distance. Inside, she saw him rummaging through a crate, pulling out a small vial. Her heart sank morphine, just as Poirot suspected. But before she could confront him, Marie appeared, her voice sharp. "Joseph, what are you doing?" she hissed, snatching the vial. "You promised you'd stop." "It's not what you think," Joseph stammered, his eyes wild. "I just needed something to calm down." Marie's face softened, but her voice was steel. "If Poirot finds out, we're done. Get rid of it." Amy backed away, her pulse racing. She reported the incident to Poirot, who listened with a grave expression. "This is most interesting," he said. "Monsieur MacArthur's weakness. It is a thread we must follow. But carefully, mademoiselle. The killer, they watch us too." That night, Amy couldn't sleep. The desert was silent, but the camp buzzed with unspoken fears. She sat by her window, her journal open, when a shadow moved outside. Her breath caught memories of the masked figure flashing through her mind. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, her boots crunching on the sand. The shadow vanished around the corner of the dining tent, and she followed, her heart pounding. There, in the moonlight, she saw Father Lavigny kneeling by a pile of crates, his hands digging into the sand. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and tucked it into his robe. Amy froze, her mind racing. Was he hiding evidence? Artifacts? Something worse? Before she could decide what to do, a hand touched her shoulder. She spun, stifling a scream, to find Poirot, his eyes sharp in the dark. "Mademoiselle, you are brave, but reckless," he whispered. "Come, we must not confront him yet." Back in her room, Amy's hands shook as she wrote, "Lavigny's hiding something. Poirot knows, but he's waiting for what?" The threatening letter, the vial, the shadow, they all swirled in her mind. Pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. The next morning, Poirot called another meeting, his demeanor more serious than ever. "Mes amis," he said, "the killers, net titans, but so does mine. Today we dig not for artifacts, but for truth, and I promise you it will be found." As the team dispersed, Amy caught Carey staring at the ruins, his expression unreadable. Marie whispered something to Joseph, who nodded, his face pale. Leidner stood alone, gazing at the horizon where Louise's ghost seemed to linger. And Father Lavigny, ever the enigma, slipped away to his workroom, the clay tablet still in his pocket. Amy closed her journal, her resolve hardening. The desert held its secrets, but with Poirot's guidance, she was determined to uncover them no matter. How dangerous the truth might be. Chapter 8. The stolen pasther. Iraqi desert stretched endlessly before the mud-brick compound, its dunes shimmering under a merciless sun that seemed to bleach the world of color. Nurse Amy Leatheran, her khaki blouse clinging to her sweat-dampened skin, stood at the edge of the archaeological dig, her eyes tracing the jagged outlines of the ancient ruins. The air was thick with dust and secrets, and the events of the past day's Louise Leidner's murder, the locked room. The blood-stained rug had left the camp in a state of brittle unease. Amy's practical nature warred with the creeping dread that had taken root in her chest. Something was wrong here, something deeper than the murder of a woman haunted by her past. The morning had begun with a revelation that shook the camp to its core. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes absurdly out of place among the gritty sand, had gathered the team in the cramped dining room. His voice, precise and measured, cut through the murmurs like a knife. "Monsieur Leigner," he had said, fixing the supposed priest with a gaze that seemed to peel away layers of deception. "Or should I say, Monsieur Raoul Menier, your masquerade is at an end." The room had erupted into gasps and accusations. Father Louise Leidner had paled, his scholarly demeanor crumbling as Poirot laid bare his true identity. A dealer in stolen artifacts, not a priest, who had infiltrated the dig to replace valuable finds with forgeries. Menier's protests were feeble, his French accent slipping into something coarser as he denied any involvement in Louise's murder. "I am no killer," he had insisted, his hands trembling. "I only sought the treasures, not blood." Amy, standing at the back of the room, had watched the team's reactions with a nurse's keen eye. Dr. Eric Leidner's face was a mask of controlled grief, but his fingers twitched as if itching to strangle Menier. Richard Carey, the handsome archaeologist, leaned against the wall, his jaw tight, his eyes darting to the door as if planning an escape. Marie Mercado, her lips pursed, glared at her husband Joseph, whose shaking hands betrayed his own secrets. The air was thick with suspicion, each person a potential betrayer. Now, as the sun climbed higher, Amy wandered the compound, her mind replaying Poirot's words. "The truth is buried, but not so deep as the ruins." Menier's deception had cracked open the camp's fragile trust. But Amy sensed the murder was more personal than a thief's greed. Louise's death felt like a wound that bled into everyone around her, and Amy was determined to understand why. She found herself drawn to Louise's room, now sealed off by Captain Maitland's orders. The door was ajar, a sliver of shadow spilling into the hallway. Amy hesitated, her practical side warning her to stay out, but curiosity sharpened by days of tension pushed her forward. Inside, the room was stifling, the air heavy with the tent of dust and tragedy. The blood-stained rug had been removed, but the faint scratch on the window frame, noted by Poirot, seemed to whisper of unseen hands. Amy's eyes fell on Louise's bedside table, where a small wooden box sat overlooked. In the chaos, it was intricately carved, its surface etched with cuneiform-like patterns that reminded her of the ominous clay tablet from days before. She opened it, her breath catching as she found a slim journal bound in cracked leather. The pages were filled with Louise's elegant, looping handwriting wand, each entry a window into her fear. "He is here, I know it." One entry read, dated a week before her death. I see his face in the shadows, but it cannot be Frederick. He is dead, isn't P. Yet the letters come, and they know too much. William, perhaps, or someone else, someone closer, wearing his name like a mask. The ruins watch me, and I cannot sleep. Amy's heart raced. Louise had been tormented, not just by letters, but by a sense of being hunted. The mention of William Bosner, Frederick's brother, sent a chill through her. Was he real or a ghost, conjured by Louise's guilt over her first husband's fate? Amy tucked the journal into her apron, determined to show it to Poirot. But as she turned to leave, a creak sounded from the hallway. She froze, her pulse loud in her ears. The shadow, of a figure loomed against the wall, elongated and distorted by the angle of the light. "Who's there?" Amy called, her voice sharper than she intended. No answer came, but the shadow shifted, retreating swiftly. Amy darted to the door, catching a glimpse of a figure in a dark jacket vanishing around the corner. Her practical shoes pounded the stone floor as she gave chase, but the hallway was empty by the time she reached it. The compound, with its maze of rooms and courtyards, seemed to swallow secrets whole. Outside, the dig site buzzed with activity, though the mood was grim. Local workers shoveled sand under the watchful eye of David Emmett, the young archaeologist whose quiet competence Amy admired. She approached him, the journal burning a hole in her apron. "David, did you see anyone just now, running from the house?" He wiped sweat from his brow, his blue eyes narrowing. "No, but I've been out here." "Why? What's happened?" Amy hesitated, then decided to trust him. "I found something in Louise's room journal. She wrote about being watched, about someone from her past. And just now, someone was there, lurking." David's expression darkened. "You shouldn't be poking around alone, Amy. Not after." He trailed off, glancing at the ruins, where the golden amulet's discovery had sparked both awe and death. "Show it to Poirot. He's the only one who seems to know what's what around here." Amy nodded, but before she could move, a shout rang out from the dig site. "Miss Leatherin, come quick." It was Bill Coleman, his boyish face pale as he waved her over. She and David hurried to the edge of a newly uncovered trench, where a cluster of workers stood, muttering in Arabic. "What is it?" Amy asked, peering into the trench. Her breath caught. Half buried in the sand was a clay figurine, its features crudely carved but unmistakably human. Its eyes were hollowed out, and a dark stained to red to be dirt-smeared its surface. "Blood," Bill whispered, his voice unsteady. "It's fresh. And look," he pointed to a scrap of cloth caught on a nearby rock, embroidered with the initials A.J. Amy's mind raced. Anne Johnson, Dr. Leidner's assistant, had been quiet but efficient, her sharp mind cataloguing the dig's finds. Could this be hers? The thought of another death tightened her chest. "We need Poirot," she said, turning to David now. Poirot was in the dining room, sipping tea with an air of unruffled calm that Amy found both infuriating and reassuring. She thrust the journal at him, recounting the shadow, the figurine, and the cloth. His mustache twitched as he flipped through the pages. his eyes glinting with interest. "Most intriguing, Mademoiselle Leatherin," he said, setting the journal down. "This journal confirms Madame Leidner's fears were not mere fancy. And this figure incest unimis en skein, a stage set for fear. But whose blood, and why now?" Before Amy could answer, a scream tore through the compound, raw and piercing. It came from the dig site. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising speed. Amy followed, her heart pounding as they reached the trench. Anne Johnson lay crumpled at the bottom, her face ashen, her lips tinged blue. A vial, its contents spilled into the sand, glinted beside her. The workers backed away, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Captain Maitland, summoned by the commotion, knelt beside Anne, his fingers searching for a pulse. He shook his head. "She's gone. Poison, by the look of it." Amy's knees weakened. 2 deaths in days, both women close to the heart of the dig. Poirot crouched beside the body, his gloved hands careful as he examined the vial. "Hydrochloric acid, perhaps, or something more exotic," he murmured. "But why here, in the open? This is no accident." He stood, his gaze sweeping the gathered team. Dr. Leidner's eyes were red-rimmed, his grief for Louise now compounded. Richard Care's hands were clenched, his knuckles white. Marie MacArthur clung to Joseph, who looked ready to bolt. Sheila Riley, Dr. Riley's daughter, stood apart, her sharp tongue silent for once, her eyes wide with shock. Poirot's voice cut through the silence. Mademoiselle Johnson heard something. The night Madame Leidner died. A cry, perhaps, or a confession. And now she too is silenced. But the killer has made a mistake. He held up a scrap of paper, barely visible in Anne's clenched fist. He unfolded it with care, revealing a single word scrawled in shaky handwriting. Bosner. The name hung in the air like a curse. Amy's mind flashed to Louise's journal, to the spectre of Frederick Bosner's brother, William, a man who conned might not exist, but whose shadow loomed over the camp. Was he real, or a convenient fiction for the killer to hide behind? Poirot turned to Amy, his voice low. "Mademoiselle, you have a nurse's eye for detail. Tell me, what did Mademoiselle Johnson say to you recently? Anything unusual?" Amy thought back, sifting through fragments of conversation. She mentioned hearing a cry the night Louise died. "Not a scream," she said, "but something softer, like a sob." She thought it came from the ruins. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "A sob? You say, perhaps, the sound of guilt or fear. We must search the ruins tonight, when the shadows are long and the guilty grow careless." As the team dispersed, their faces etched with fear, Amy felt the weight of the journal in her apron. She handed it to Poirot, who tucked it into his coat with a nod. "You have done well, mademoiselle, but be cautious. The killer knows you are watching." The day dragged on, the camp suffocating under the twin burdens of grief and suspicion. Amy tried to focus on her duties, checking supplies and tending to minor injuries among the workers. But her mind was elsewhere. The figurine, the blood, the word Bosner, They were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. And then there was Menhir, the false priest, whose deception had thrown everything into question. Was he a killer, or merely a thief, caught in the wrong game? As dusk fell, the sky burned crimson, casting the ruins in a surreal glow. Poirot gathered Amy, David, and Captain Maitland for a search of the dig site. "The ruins hold answers," he said, his voice steady. "We must look where the past and present meet." The four moved silently through the trenches, their lanterns casting flickering shadows. The air was cooler now, but Amy's skin prickled with unease. The ruins, with their crumbling walls and buried secrets, felt alive, as if the ghosts of millennia watched their every step. They reached the spot where the golden amulet had been found, its discovery now tainted by death. David knelt, brushing sand from a stone slab. "This wasn't here yesterday," he said, his voice tight. The slab was loose, and with Maitland's help he lifted it, revealing a narrow tunnel beneath. Amy's breath caught. "A passage," she whispered. Could this be how the killer got into Louise's room? Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, or perhaps it is a path to something else, treasure or truth." They descended the tunnel's walls, closing in around them. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and time. At the tunnel's end, they found a small chamber, its walls lined with clay jars. One was cracked open, revealing a glint of Goldmore artifacts, hidden from the world. "Menhir's work," David muttered. "He must have been smuggling these out." But Poirot's attention was elsewhere. He knelt by a pile of sand, sifting through it with gloved fingers. "Regard us," he said, holding up a small objecta silver ring, engraved with a delicate flower pattern. "This belonged to Madame Leidner. I saw it on her finger the day I arrived." Amy's stomach twisted. "Then how did it get here?" Poirot's gaze was grim. "Someone brought it. Someone who knew this place, and who wished to hide their connection to her death." Before they could process the find, a low rumble shook the chamber. Sand trickled from the ceiling, and Maitland's lantern flickered. "We need to get out," he said, his voice urgent. "This place isn't stable." They scrambled back through the tunnel, emerging into the night just as a sandstorm roared to life. The wind howled, stinging Amy's face with grit. The camp was a blur of shadows and chaos, the storm trapping them as surely as the murderer's web. Back in the compound, Poirot gathered the team in the dining room, his face unreadable. "The ring confirms it," he said. "The killer is among us, and they are growing desperate, but they cannot hide forever." Amy's eyes scanned the faces around her doctor, Leidner, Carey, the Macathos, Sheila, Bill, David. Each held secrets, each a potential motive. The storm raged outside, a wall of sand that sealed them in with a killer. And in her mind, Louise's journal echoed, "The ruins watch me, and I cannot sleep." As the wind screamed, Amy knew the truth was close, buried just beneath the surface, waiting for Poirot's little grey cells to unearth it. But with another death and a storm closing in, time was running out. Chapter 9. Blood on the ruins. The Iraqi desert stretched endlessly around the Hassaneh dig site, its golden sands shimmering under a merciless sun. The air was thick with the scent of dust and secrets, and for Nurse Amy Leatheran, the morning brought no relief from the mounting dread that had settled over the archaeological camp. Louise Leidner's murder, still unsolved, hung like a spectre over the mud-brick compound, and the arrival of Hercule Poirot had only sharpened the tension. Now, as the team gathered for breakfast, the news of another death shattered the fragile, calm. Amy sat at the long wooden table, her coffee untouched, her eyes scanning the faces of the expedition members. Dr. Eric Leidner, his face haggard, poked listlessly at his plate. Richard Carey, the handsome archaeologist, avoided eye contact, his usual charm dimmed by exhaustion. Marie Mercado, her lips pursed, muttered something to her husband, Joseph, whose trembling hands betrayed his nerves. Father Raoul Menor, as Poirot had revealed his true identity as a dealer in stolen artifacts, at a part, his dark eyes unreadable. The young Sheila Riley, Dr. Giles Riley's sharp-tongued daughter, was absent, likely, off exploring the ruins with David Emmett, the quiet assistant surveyor. Captain Maitland, the local policeman, had joined them, his weathered face grim as he sipped tea. The silence broke when Bill Coleman, the gangly young dig worker, burst into the dining room, his face pale. "It's Anne," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Anne Johnson, she's dead, out by the ziggurat. I found her just now." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Amy's heart lurched. Anne Johnson, Dr. Leidner's meticulous assistant, had been a steady presence, her sharp mind cataloguing every find with precision. The thought of her lying lifeless among the ruins was unthinkable. Poirot, seated at the table's head, set down his cup with deliberate care. "Monsieur Coleman," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "take us to her. Vite, si, vous." Plot. The team followed Bill out into the blistering heat, their footsteps crunching on the sandy path leading to the ancient ziggurat, its stepped silhouette looming against the horizon. Amy's nurse's instincts kicked in, her mind racing through possibilities: heat stroke, a fall, or something darker. Poirot walked beside her, his black shoes absurdly polished against the desert grit, his eyes scanning the ground as if it might whisper its secrets. They reached the ziggurat's base, where Anne's body lay crumpled beside a scattering of unearthed pottery shards. Her glasses were askew, one lens cracked, and her face was frozen in a grimace of pain. A faint froth lingered at the corner of her mouth, and her hands clutched at the sand as if she'd fought to hold on to life. Poirot knelt beside her, his gloved fingers hovering over her body without touching. "Poison," he murmured, his moustache twitching. "The froth, the rigidity suggests a rapid-acting toxin. But how was it administered?" He glanced at Amy. "Mademoiselle Leatheran, your observations, please. You knew her habits." Amy swallowed her throat dry. Anne was careful. She didn't eat or drink much outside meals. She was always at the lab, cataloguing finds or checking the storage tents. Her eyes fell on a small glass vial, half buried in the sand a few feet away. "That's not one of ours, is it?" Poirot's gaze followed hers. He retrieved the vial with a handkerchief, holding it to the light. It was empty, but a faint chemical scent lingered. "Acid prussic hydrocyanic acid, perhaps," he said. "A deadly choice, odorless in small doses, but lethal in moments." He turned to Captain Maitland. "Monsieur, please secure this area. No one touches anything." Maitland nodded, barking orders to 2 local workers who had followed the group. The team stood in a loose circle, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. Marie Mercado clutched her husband's arm, her eyes darting toward Raoul Manier. "He's the one who's been sneaking around the lab," she snapped. "He's been stealing artifacts. Maybe he poisoned her to cover his tracks." Menard's face darkened. "I am no murderer, madame. My business is with antiquities, not death." "Enough." Poirot's voice cut through the rising clamor. "We will not accuse without evidence. Mademoiselle Letherin, you mentioned the lab. Was anything missing?" Amy hesitated, recalling her last visit to the lab with Anne. "There was a vial of acid hydrochloric, I think, for cleaning artifacts. Anne kept it locked in a cabinet. She was strict about inventory." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we must inspect this cabinet. Monsieur Coleman, you found her. What were you doing here so early?" Bill flushed, shifting his weight. I was checking the dig grids. Dr. Leidner asked me to mark new sections before the heat got bad. I saw her lying there, and I didn't know what to do." Poirot studied him, his silence more probing than any question. Amy noticed Bill's hands twisting together, his knuckles white. She remembered his confession about forging documents for Menier. Could he be hiding more? The group returned to the compound, the sun climbing higher, casting harsh shadows. Poirot lead the way to the lab, a low-roofed building cluttered with tools, brushes, and crates of artifacts. Amy pointed to the cabinet in the corner, its lock intact but slightly scratched. Poirot examined it, his fingers tracing the metal. Forced, perhaps, but subtly. Someone knew what they were looking for. Inside, the shelves were orderly, but one slot was empty. "The hydrochloric acid is gone," Amy said, her stomach sinking. "But that's not what killed her, is it?" "No," Poirot replied. "Hydrochloric acid is not so swift. The vial we found suggests something more potent, swapped perhaps to confuse us." He turned to the team, his voice low. "Someone here knew Anne's habits, her routines. This was no accident." As they left the lab, Amy's mind replayed a moment from the previous night. She'd been unable to sleep, haunted by Louise's murder and the camp's growing paranoia. Wandering the compound, she'd overheard Anne speaking softly to someone near the storage tents. "I heard a cry," Anne had said, her voice trembling. "The night Louise died. It wasn't just the wind." Amy hadn't seen the other person, but the memory now felt vital. She pulled Poirot aside, lowering her voice. "Monsieur Poirot, last night, Anne mentioned hearing a cry the night Louise was killed. She sounded scared, like she knew something. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A cry, you say? This is most interesting. Did she describe it? No, she was interrupted. Someone was with her, but I couldn't see who. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. We must consider the timing. Madame Leidner's death, locked in her room, was a puzzle of precision. Mademoiselle Johnson's death, out in the open, is a bold escalation. The killer grows reckless or desperate. The day wore on, the camp suffocating under the weight of suspicion. Amy joined Poirot in searching Anne's quarters, hoping for clues. The room was Spartan, with neat stacks of notebooks and a single photograph of Anne with an older woman, likely her mother. Under the bed, Amy found a crumpled scrap of paper, half burned, with a single word scrawled in Anne's precise handwriting. Bosner. She handed it to Poirot, her pulse quickening. Louise's first husband, his brother. Anne must have suspected something. Poirot's fingers traced the charred edges. Or someone wished us to think so. This name, Bosner, it haunts this place like a ghost. But is it a man, a memory, or a mask? The afternoon brought no answers, only more questions. The team gathered for a tense lunch, their conversations stilted. Sheila Riley, back from the ruins, tossed her auburn hair and scoffed at the group's somber mood. What's the use of moping? If someone's picking us off, sitting here won't stop them. Mind your tongue, Sheila, Dr. Leidner snapped, his voice sharp. 2 women are dead, and you're all acting like it's the end of the world, she retorted, her eyes flashing. Maybe Anne found something she shouldn't have. This dig's worth a fortune people kill for less. Amy watched Richard Carey flinch at Sheila's words, his fork pausing mid-air. Marie Mercatho's lips tightened, and Joseph's hands shook, so badly he spilled his water. Even Menia, usually composed, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot, however, seemed to relish the tension, his gaze darting from face to face. As the meal ended, Poirot rose. Ms. Amos, I propose we visit the ziggurat. Again, the scene of Mademoiselle Johnson's death may yet speak to us. Chapter 10. The Desert's Secrets. The Iraqi sun blazed mercilessly over the Hassani dig site, its heat a relentless hammer pounding the earth into submission. Nurse Amy Leatheran wiped sweat from her brow, her khaki blouse clinging to her skin. As she stood at the edge of the excavation pit, the air shimmered with dust, stirred by the frantic activity of the archaeological team, now fractured by suspicion and grief. Louise Leidner's murder in her locked room, followed by Anne Johnson's poisoning, had cast a pall over the camp, turning every glance into an accusation and every whisper into a potential clue. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit somehow, untouched by the desert's grit, paced nearby, his eyes darting across the ruins like a hawk scanning for prey. Amy's boots crunched on the parched soil as she approached Poirot, who was studying a weathered stone slab half buried in the sand. Monsieur Poirot, she ventured, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. You said the truth lies deeper. Do you really think the killer's hiding something out here in the ruins? Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. The desert, Mademoiselle Amy, is a keeper of secrets. It buries them in layers, just as it buries the past. But secrets, like artifacts, can be unearthed with care. He gestured toward the slab, its surface etched with faint cuneiform. This dig site is not just a place of history, it's a stage for human passions. Greed, love, revenge. All have left their marks here. Amy squinted at the slab, its symbols incomprehensible to her. You think the murders are tied to the artifacts? Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone maddeningly cryptic. Or perhaps the artifacts are a distraction, a veil for something more personal. Come, we must explore this trapdoor you spoke of. It may hold the key to our mysteries. The trapdoor had been discovered that morning, hidden beneath a crumbling section of the dig site's outer perimeter. Amy had stumbled upon it while trailing Poirot's earlier instructions to observe. Beground as much as the people, a slab of sandstone, cleverly disguised to blend with the surrounding ruin, had shifted under her weight, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. The team had been too rattled by Anne's death to investigate immediately. But now, with the midday sun offering some clarity, Poirot insisted on action. Dr. Eric Leidner, his face haggard from grief and sleeplessness, joined them, his usual scholarly enthusiasm replaced by a haunted intensity. This could be a storage chamber, he said, crouching beside the trapdoor. The Sumerians often hid their treasures underground to protect them from raiders. But why would anyone conceal it now? An excellent question, Dr. Poirot replied, adjusting his hat to shield his eyes. Let us find out, Amy. Poirot and Leidner were joined by Sheila Riley, Dr. Giles Riley's sharp-tongued daughter, who had taken to shadowing Poirot with a mix of skepticism and fascination. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical bun, but her green eyes sparkled with defiance. "If this is about smuggled artifacts," she said, crossing her arms, "I'd bet on Carey. He's been too cozy with the local traders, and he was always hovering around Louise." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mademoiselle Sheila, your observation are noted, but let us not leap to conclusions. The heart of a crime is rarely so simple." The trapdoor, when pried open, revealed a rough-hewn stone staircase spiraling into the earth. The air that wafted up was cool and musty, carrying the scent of ancient clay and something sharper, perhaps decay. Amy's pulse quickened as she lit a kerosene lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Poirot, undeterred by the gloom, descended first, his small frame moving with surprising agility. Amy followed, gripping the lantern tightly, with Leidner and Sheila close behind. The staircase ended in a low chamber, its walls lined with niches containing clay jars and small stone figurines. Dust coated everything, undisturbed for so it seemed. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned the room, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of a jar. "Regardus," he murmured, pointing to a faint footprint in the dust, its edges crisp. "This is recent. Someone has been here, and not long ago. Amy's stomach churned. The killer. Perhaps Poirot said, or someone seeking what the killer seeks. He knelt, examining the footprint. A man's boot, size 10, I estimate. Not unlike those worn by several in our camp. Leidner's voice trembled. This could be a looter's cache. Raoul many a father Livigny. I mean was dealing in stolen artifacts. Could he have used this place? Sheila snorted. Menier's a fraud, but he's no killer. Too spineless. I'd look at Mecca, though. He's been shaking like a leaf since Louise died. Poirot's gaze flicked to her. Mademoiselle, your tongue is as sharp as your father's scalpel, but let us focus on what we find, not what we suspect. The chamber's contents were a treasure trove, intricately carved seals, bronze tools, and a small golden statuette of a winged bull, its eyes set with lapis lazuli. Amy's breath caught at the sight, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. He tapped a section of the wall, producing a hollow sound. A hidden compartment, he said, his voice low. Help me, Mademoiselle Amy. Together they pried loose, bar a stone panel, revealing a narrow alcove. Inside lay a leather satchel, its surface scuffed but modern. Amy's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of documents, letters, maps, and photographs. One photo showed Louise Leidner, younger and radiant, standing beside a man with sharp features and cold eyes. The back was inscribed, Louise and Frederick, Damascus, 1918. Frederick Bosner, Amy whispered, her voice echoing in the chamber. Her first husband, Leidner's face paled. That's impossible. Frederick died years ago. Poirot's eyes narrowed, or so we were told. The past, it seems, is not so easily buried. The documents included a map of the dig site, marked with red ink circling the trapdoor's location. Another letter, written in a jagged hand, read, "You cannot escape what you stole. The desert will claim its due." The signature was a single initial, W. William Bosner, Sheila said, her voice barely above a whisper. Louise thought he was after her. Poirot folded the letter carefully. This may be a clue, or it may be a deception. The killer wishes us to believe in ghosts, but Hercule Poirot deals in facts. As they emerged from the chamber, the desert sun felt like a slap after the cool darkness. The camp was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of workers replaced by an oppressive silence. Amy's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Louise's fear of her past, the forged artifacts, the hidden chamber. Was the killer using the digs by isolation to cover their tracks? Or was this about something older, tied to the ruins themselves? Chapter 10. The Desert's Secrets. The Iraqi sun blazed mercilessly over the Hassani dig site, its heat a relentless hammer pounding the earth into submission. Nurse Amy Leatheran wiped sweat from her brow, her khaki blouse clinging to her skin, as she stood at the edge of the excavation pit. The air shimmered with dust, stirred by the frantic activity of the archaeological team, now fractured by suspicion and grief. Louise Leidner's murder in her locked room, followed by Anne Johnson's poisoning, had cast a pall over the camp, turning every glance into an accusation, and every whisper into a potential clue. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit somehow untouched by the desert's grit, paced nearby, his eyes darting across the ruins like a hawk scanning for prey. Amy's boots crunched on the parched soil as she approached Poirot, who was studying a weathered stone slab half buried in the sand. "Monsieur Poirot," she ventured, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach, "you said the truth lies deeper. Do you really think the killer's hiding something out here in the ruins?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "The desert, Mademoiselle Amy, is a keeper of secrets. It buries them in layers, just as it buries the past. But secrets, like artifacts, can be unearthed with care." He gestured toward the slab, its surface etched with faint cuneiform. "This site is not just a place of history, it is a stage for human passions. Greed, love, revenge, all have left their marks here." Amy squinted at the slab, its symbols incomprehensible to her. "You think the murders are tied to the artifact?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone maddeningly cryptic. "Or perhaps the artifacts are a distraction, a veil for something more personal. Come, we must explore this trapdoor you spoke of. It may hold the key to our mystery." The trapdoor had been discovered that morning, hidden beneath a crumbling section of the dig site's outer perimeter. Amy had stumbled upon it while trailing Poirot's earlier instructions to observe the ground as much as the people. A slab of sandstone, cleverly disguised to blend with the surrounding ruin, had shifted under her weight, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. The team had been too rattled by Anne's death to investigate immediately, but now, with the midday sun offering some clarity, Poirot insisted on action. Dr. Louise Leidner, his face haggard from grief and sleeplessness, joined them, his usual scholarly enthusiasm replaced by a haunted intensity. "This could be a storage chamber," he said, crouching beside the trapdoor. "The Sumerians often hid their treasures underground to protect them from raiders. But why would anyone conceal it now?" "An excellent question," Dr. Poirot replied, adjusting his hat to shield his eyes. "Let us find out, Amy." Poirot and Leidner were joined by Sheila Riley, Dr. Giles Riley's sharp-tongued daughter, who had taken to shadowing Poirot with a mix of skepticism and fascination. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical bun, but her green eyes sparkled with defiance. "If this is about smuggled artifacts," she said, crossing her arms, "I'd bet on Carey. He's been too cozy with the local traders, and he was always hovering around Louise." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mademoiselle Sheila, your observations are noted, but let us not leap to conclusions. The heart of a crime is rarely so simple." The trapdoor, when pried open, revealed a rough-hewn stone staircase spiraling into the earth. The air that wafted up was cool and musty, carrying the scent of ancient clay and something sharper, perhaps decay. Amy's pulse quickened as she lit a kerosene lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Poirot, undeterred by the gloom, descended first, his small frame moving with surprising agility. Amy followed, gripping the lantern tightly, with Leidner and Sheila close behind. The staircase ended in a low chamber, its walls lined with niches containing clay jars and small stone figurines. Dust coated everything, undisturbed for seconds. So it seemed. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned the room, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of a jar. "Regardus," he murmured, pointing to a faint footprint in the dust, its edges crisp. "This is recent. Someone has been here, and not long ago." Amy's stomach churned. "The killer, perhaps," Poirot said. "Or someone seeking. But the killer seeks." He knelt, examining the footprint. "A man's boot, size 10, I estimate. Not unlike those worn by several in our camp." Leidner's voice trembled. "This could be a looter's cache. Raoul Menier, Father Lavigny, was dealing in stolen artifacts. Could he have used this place?" Sheila snorted. "Menier's a fraud, but he's no killer. Too spineless. I'd look at MacArthur. He's been shaking like a leaf since Louise died." Poirot's gaze flicked to her. "Mademoiselle, your tongue is as sharp as your father's scalpel. But let us focus on what we find, not what we suspect." The chamber's contents were a treasure trove, intricately carved seals, bronze tools, and a small golden statuette of a winged bull, its eyes set with lapis lazuli. Amy's breath caught at the sight, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. He tapped a section of the wall, producing a hollow sound. "A hidden compartment," he said, his voice low. "Help me, Mademoiselle Amy." Together they pried loose a stone panel, revealing a narrow alcove. Inside lay a leather satchel, its surface scuffed but modern. Amy's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of documents, letters, maps, and photographs. One photo showed Louise Leidner, younger and radiant, standing beside a man with sharp features and cold eyes. The back was inscribed, "Louise and Frederick, Damascus, 1918. Frederick Bosner," Amy whispered, her voice echoing in the chamber. "Her first husband." Leidner's face paled. "That's impossible. Frederick died years ago." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Or so we were told. The past, it seems, is not so easily buried." The documents included a map of the dig site, marked with red ink circling the trapdoor's location. Another letter, written in a jagged hand, read, "You cannot escape what you stole. The desert will claim its due." The signature was a single initial, W. William Bosner, Sheila said, her voice barely above a whisper. Louise thought he was after her. Poirot folded the letter carefully. "This may be a clue, or it may be a deception. The killer wishes us to believe in ghosts, but Hercule Poirot deals in facts." As they emerged from the chamber, the desert sun felt like a slap after the cool darkness. The camp was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of workers replaced by an oppressive silence. Amy's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Louise's fear of her past, the forged artifacts, the hidden chamber. Was the killer using the digs, tessellation to cover their tracks? Or was this about something older, tied to the ruins themselves? Back at the compound, Poirot gathered the team in the mess hall, the satchel's contents spread across a table. Richard Carey, his handsome face drawn with fatigue, studied the photograph of Louise and Frederick. "I knew she had a past," he said, his voice tight. "But she never mentioned a brother-in-law." Joseph Mercado, his hands twitching, avoided Poirot's gaze. "This is nonsense. Bosna's dead. Someone's playing a game with us." Marie Mercado, her eyes red from crying, snapped a game. "Louise is dead. Anne is dead. And you're calling it a game." Poirot raised a hand for silence. Amos, the killer is clever. They use the past to cloud the present. But I, Hercule Poirot, see through such mists. This chamber, these documents, they're pieces of a puzzle. The question is, who placed Bend there? Amy's eyes drifted to Bill Coleman, the young dig worker, who lingered at the edge of the group, his face pale. He'd admitted to forging documents for Mania, but was there more to his involvement? She recalled his nervous glances during dinner, his habit of disappearing into the ruins at odd hours. Before Poirot could continue, a shout rang out from the dig site. David Emmett, the quiet surveyor, burst into the mess hall, his face streaked with dust. "There's something you need to see," he said, breathless. "In the western quadrant, we found bones." The team hurried to the site, where workers had uncovered a shallow pit. Amid the sand lay human remains, brittle and yellowed, but disturbingly recent, not ancient. A rusted knife lay beside them, its blade stained with dark residue. Captain Maitland, summoned from Hassany, examined the scene with a grim expression. "These aren't from the 4th millennium," he said. "Maybe a year old, at most." Amy's heart sank. Another victim, hidden in the desert's embrace. Poirot knelt beside the bones, his gloved fingers brushing the knife. "This is no accident," he said. "This is a message. The killer wishes us to know they have killed before." Sheila, standing beside Amy, whispered, "What if this is Frederick Bosna? What if he's been here all along?" Poirot stood, dusting off his hands. Possibility, mademoiselle, but the truth lies deeper still. We must return to the locked room, to Louisa's final moments. The answer is there, in the shadows of her fear. That night, Amy couldn't sleep. The camp was a maze of secrets, each person a potential suspect. She sat by her window, the desert stretching endlessly before her, its silence both beautiful and menacing. The trapdoor's contents haunted her, the photograph, the letter, the map. Were they clues, or had the killer planted them to mislead? And the bones, whose were they? She pulled out her journal, her pen scratching across the page. The desert hides everything: history, treasure, truth. But Poirot's right. Nothing stays buried forever. As she wrote, a faint noise broke the silence, a soft scrape like footsteps on sand. She froze, her lantern casting long shadows across the room. The sound stopped, but her pulse didn't. Someone was out there, watching. The next morning, Poirot summoned Amy to Louise's room, now sealed since the murder. He stood by the barred window, his finger tracing a faint scratch on the frame. "This," he said, "is where the killer entered. Not through the door, not through magic, but through ingenuity. A rope, a pulley, a moment of distraction." Amy frowned. "But the window was barred." But bars can be loosened, then tightened again. The scratch tells me so." He pointed to the ceiling, where a faint discoloration caught the light. "And there, mademoiselle, is where the killer stood above, not below." Amy's mind raced. A hidden passage, a trapdoor, a ceiling axis, each piece fit into Poirot's puzzle. But who Carey with his charm and secrets? Mikado with his trembling hands, or someone else, hiding in plain sight? As they left the room, Sheila caught up with them, her face flushed. "I saw Carey last night near the western quadrant. He was digging alone. I think he's hiding something." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Then we shall watch Monsieur Carey closely. But first, we must test a theory. Mademoiselle Amy, will you assist me in a small experiment?" The day unfolded with Poirot's meticulous planning, his little gray cells working overtime. He enlisted Amy to reenact Louise's movements, standing in the locked room as he tested angles and shadows. The team watched, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Amy felt exposed, her every step echoing Louise's last moments. When Poirot paused, staring at the ceiling, she knew he was close to unmasking the truth. As dusk fell, the camp gathered for dinner, the tension thicker than the desert heat. Poirot raised his glass, his voice calm but commanding. "Tomorrow, Mies Amos, we shall uncover the final piece. The desert has spoken, and Hercule Poirot has listened." Amy's journal entry that night was brief but heavy. "The truth is close, but so is danger. I trust Poirot, but the desert, it feels alive, watching us all."